Hey guys, welcome to this session by K21Academy. Cloud computing has been transforming the way people work and access information. When you talk about cloud computing, it cannot shy away without mentioning Amazon Web Services, right? Which is one of the leading cloud service providers in the market. If you are looking for a career in this domain, you have landed at the right place. K21 Academy brings a complete course on AWS Solutions Architect and AWS DevOps, which not only touches upon the fundamentals but also dives deeper at the conceptual level. Now let us take a quick glance at the agenda. So we will begin with cloud computing overview. And then we will look at cloud service models, which are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And then we will look at cloud deployment model, public, private, and hybrid cloud. And then we will look at AWS Global Infrastructure Services. What does a region and availability zones mean? Region and availability zone will play an important role, especially for high availability and disaster recovery. And then we will look into what all AWS services are available at high level. Post that, we will go through the core services, identity access management, compute, which is nothing but your virtual machine, and couple of other compute related services. Then storage, network, and databases. And then we will look at services related to automation and configuration, which is cloud formation and ops work. We will also look into services related to audit and monitoring like CloudWatch and CloudTrail. And then we will look at application services like simple notification service, simple email service, simple queue service, and simple workflow services. Also, we will look into AWS DevOps tools, which are code commit, code build, code deploy, and code pipeline. And then we will try to understand the AWS architecture. Post that, we will see how to access the services of AWS. And then we will see how to create an AWS free tier account. Post that, we will see how to configure AWS CloudWatch to create billings alarm and service limits. And then we will see how to install Windows machine on AWS and install command line tools like AWS CLI, EKSCTL, and kubectl on Linux. And then we will see how to reset password of Windows machine on AWS. Post that, we will see how to install web server of type IIS on EC2. And then we will see how to install and configure AWS CLI and how to use AWS programmatically using software development kit for Node.js and SDK. And then we will see how to use AWS CLI in order to create S3 bucket.
So let's first look at what is overview of cloud computing. Now, if you look at the definition of cloud computing is nothing but delivery of computing services like your servers, which could be a virtual machine or dedicated servers, or storage, different type of storage, databases, networking, and tools and softwares which are available over the internet. And we'll show a little bit later how you're going to access. I'm going to show you how to create a virtual machine or database or network or servers on AWS console. So cloud computing enables companies to enable or consume the compute resources such as servers, storage, or an application similar to what you use for water and electricity in terms of in a pay-as-you-go model. Rather than building from scratch, you just use them and pay what you use, similar to what you do in current world for electricity or water. Now, if you look at the cloud computing definition, cloud computing is a model for enabling conveniently on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable resources, as I said earlier, like network, storage, application services that can be rapidly provisioned or released. If the demand goes down, you return it back to the cloud provider with a minimal management effort or service provider interaction. So you never one-on-one interact with a cloud service provider. You do it from the console on a self-service basis. Now, this cloud computing is composed of basically five essential characteristics, which we'll see in a minute, 3 service models and 4 deployment models. So what these are? So first is the essential characteristics. As I said earlier, it's a resource pooling, which means there might be multiple servers, and which is a pool of servers or pool of network or pool of storage from which you get your resources. And the resources is basically on demand, using on demand self-service, which we'll see that again a little bit later, how I'm going to provision these resources. Then these measured services, which means how much I'm using, I can measure that. or I can provision as required. Rapid elasticity, which means as my request increases or as my demand increases, I can increase the resources, and as demand goes down, I can reduce that resources as well. And then broad different ways to access over the network. So these are some of the basic essential characteristics of cloud computing. There are three service models, which is software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And in that you have a four deployment model: public, private, hybrid, and there's a fourth one which is community. Let's look at these service models. So the service models are infrastructure as a service, which we also call as IaaS, platform as a service, which is PaaS, and then software as a service, which is SaaS. So typically, this is where it used to be traditionally on-premise. When you deploy your applications on-premise, this is what you have, where everything, right from networking, storage, servers, virtualization, operating system, a middleware, runtime, data, and entire application, all these needs to be managed by customer. Whereas in infrastructure as a service model, the networking, storage, server, and virtualization is the responsibility of cloud vendor, whereas operating system, middleware, runtime, data, and application is managed by the customer. Now, if you're completely new, virtualization, the common questions we get is, first of all, what is virtualization? So virtualization is where you have one single server. On that server, you can run a multiple operating system or multiple machines on a single underlying server. So that's virtualization, like VMware, or you might have heard of VMware or other virtualization softwares like Zen or other ones. Another one which we see or here is what is runtime. And in this case, runtime could be your runtime application on which application run, which uses runtime like Java development kit or .NET based runtime libraries and so on. You already know operating system. Middleware applications are, operating system is like in this case, Windows, Linux, or other things as well. So in infrastructure service, your network, storage, server, virtualization, as I said earlier, is managed by cloud vendor, and you as a customer is responsible for operating systems. So any patching on those servers, or creation of what operating system to select is, or what middleware or database or data, all these are responsibility of client. So an example of infrastructure service, you say give me a machine, or you install a virtual machine, that's an example of infrastructure service. Or you say I want some storage, that's an example of infrastructure service. You say I want to create a network and I need some set of IP addresses, or I want to create a load balancer. All these are example of infrastructure service. Then comes platform as a service. In platform as a service, whatever you were doing or whatever was a cloud manager or cloud vendors provide responsibility in infrastructure service, that plus the operating system, middleware, and runtime, all are responsibility of cloud vendor. You as a customer will be managing just the data and application. So example of some of the platform as a service is you have a relational database service, which is you get the entire platform and you can create databases and you just run and manage database. You don't know, or you're not managing underlying operating system. You're not managing underlying any runtime libraries or middleware for that reason if you have middleware. Another example of a platform as a service could be a web apps, which we'll see a little bit later, or Docker and Kubernetes, or Elastic Beanstalk. These are some of the examples which we'll see a little bit later in this module. So all these are platform. So all you need to do is you have the underlying platform. You simply build that particular or create that application. For example, really, as I said, a database or Beanstalk or Docker and Kubernetes on AWS, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service, and so on. So that is all like cloud vendor's responsibility. You'll be managing just the data or application on top of that as you as a customer. And final one is software as a service, in which everything is managed by the cloud vendor. All you need is a license and or a login ID details, and you're paying just for the login ID and details in software as a service. And rest all, you don't need to worry about high availability. You don't need to worry about disaster recovery. You don't need to worry about security, as long as your login IDs you're keeping secure. Underlying network level, infrastructure level, it's all customers or cloud vendors' responsibility. So example of software as a service, you might have Gmail is, you can take an example, or Dropbox is an example of software as a service. Or maybe if in an enterprise software, you might have heard of Salesforce, where you do everything on the cloud. All you need is a login detail, and rest all is managed by the cloud vendor. So these are the three models which will see that infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And now, if you are working on AWS DevOps or AWS Solution Architect, you'll be working mainly on infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. These are the two main categories you'll be working, and we'll see a little bit later. Software as a service is typically are, as I said, a packaged application like Salesforce or um, uh, or other like Gmail or Dropbox and so on, or Office 365 for that reason, if you're working on Microsoft Office, Microsoft applications, or for that reason, Oracle Fusion applications, Oracle Financials on the cloud, HCM cloud, and so on. So these are some of the examples of infrastructure as a service. Now let's look at deployment model. And the deployment model are involved public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, and there's one more community which I'll explain in a minute. So public cloud are typically offered by third-party providers. Anyone in the public can access them, and then you can scale up quickly and conveniently. Examples are your AWS, your Google, your Azure, Microsoft, your Oracle, IBM Cloud, and so on. These are publicly available cloud. Then you have a private cloud, which is offered by selective users, or offered selective users for a particular company, dedicated over either on the internet or on a private internal network within private. Sometimes you can also have the entire cloud hardware and software are set at the customer premises. We call cloud at customer as well, which provides greater security because it's only for dedicated one customer. It requires traditional data centers and staffing and maintenance because you probably are doing managing for a specific customer. So that's private cloud. Here the software will be like on similar what you do in cloud, but it's dedicated for a particular customer. And then come hybrid cloud, which is combination of public and private, where you have some part public and some part private, which is on customer premises as well. So in this model, you have a shared responsibility because some applications are running onto cloud and some are on-premise. So security of them, it's shared between the customer and cloud vendor. Now, the controls, you can say my sensitive information are on-premise and my less sensitive or maybe something which I can live with. If I don't have any data restrictions, I can put them into cloud as well. So hybrid cloud is that. And there's a fourth one, which is community cloud, where you have group of community or couple of customers, related customers. So for example, government organizations. So government say that all the police department, security, all home office departments are managed or run in a cloud. Community cloud we say, or government cloud, an example of community cloud where multiple similar kind of departments all related to government are part of that cloud. So that's community cloud as well. So these are some of the deployment models. So to recap very quickly, you have service model, which is software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and deployment is public, private, hybrid. These are three service model: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. PaaS, IaaS, IaaS, and SaaS. And these are the three deployment: public, private, hybrid, and community cloud model. And we're going to look at introduction to AWS, and we'll try to see what all things we can, just an overview of AWS. So if you look at the AWS, and this is a screenshot which I've taken, I think from 2019. So it's a year old or a year or two, depending on when you're watching that, maybe 2 years old. I'm recording this early 2021. So that was probably around a year and a half back, where AWS is the biggest market player, has the maximum number of market share, then followed by Azure and Google Cloud and IBM Cloud. So IBM, Google, and Microsoft Azure combined together, these three is around same as AWS alone. Now, this is a comparison of different services. Now, we have not looked at these services yet. What are the AWS services? But later when we talk about that, you will be able to correlate this. So from a storage point of view, there's a something called as object storage and a block storage. So this is a object storage where object storage, what these are, you can Google it or we'll cover when we look at the storage module. But storage in AWS is S3, which is simple storage service. In Azure, it's blob, and in GCP, which is normal storage, like that. Compute, which is like virtual machines. Here in AWS is called as EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud or Elastic Cloud Compute. In Microsoft Azure, virtual machines, and then in GCP, it's compute engine. Similarly, the container service we call EC2 or ECS, Elastic Compute, which is a Elastic Container Service, ECS, which is a Elastic Compute Container Service. In Azure, it's Azure Container Service, ACS, and in Kubernetes, it's Kubernetes Engine. Or Google Kubernetes, uh, there is a container and there is a Kubernetes. In Kubernetes engine, in Google is called as Google Kubernetes Engine. In Azure it's Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. And in AWS, we have EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service. Like that, you have a web apps, which is Elastic Beanstalk, corresponding Azure App Services. And on GCP, that's App Engine. If we look at the database, which is a record, which is a basically a different type of database we'll look at when we look at the database module, which is a DynamoDB, Cosmos DB in Microsoft Azure, and in GCP, it's Cloud Data Store. Similarly, the relational database in or RDBMS we call that database on AWS is RDS Relational Data Store. In Microsoft Azure, it's SQL database. In GCP, it's BigQuery. And then there's a serverless version, which is a serverless, which we'll see what these are. Lambda in AWS. In Microsoft Azure, it's Azure Functions, or in GCP, it's Cloud Functions, which is nothing but functions as a service. Now, again, if you don't understand it or there's no need to remember, just see that there is a corresponding service in each of these cloud vendors, which you see. Now, before we move or before I start talking about the global infrastructure, let's first look at why these or why AWS. Now, what you see diagram on the right hand side is from August 2020, which is Gartner's Magic Quadrant. You have, and if you, as you see, Amazon AWS is on the leaders quadrant at top, which is from a both vision point of view and ability to execute point of view, it's number one. So as per this Gartner's Magic Quadrant for infrastructure as a service, AWS is a leader. Now, AWS, as per Gartner, has the most mature and enterprise-ready services with the deepest capability for governing a large number of users and resources. Governing a large number of users and resources that if you see the most mature cloud out of all the cloud vendors. As per August 2020, AWS dominates probably around with 47% of market share, and the world's 41% of workload is comprising of public cloud infrastructure on AWS. And AWS certification that you're learning is a fast becoming the must-have certificate for any IT professional working within cloud. So these are some of the reasons why you should be looking at AWS. Now, I'll talk about the services as well a little bit later, but first look at in the next lesson what is global infrastructure, which is consist of a region and availability zone, and how do you access or select a region, and how do you select a zone, and what does zone means. We were looking at global infrastructure. So AWS has a global infrastructure that consists of a region and availability zone. And what I mean by global infrastructure is that AWS servers, their data centers, their entire services are available in entire different part of the world, which are called as regions. The blue dots or blue circles represent the regions that are already in place, whereas the one in red ones are the one which are coming soon. And these are planned, and these are as you see across the globe. So there is a concept of region, and region have availability zones. So consider this as a if you look at this diagram, you have one region in US or multiple regions within US. So this is a west coast, so US West and US East. Within East, there are multiple, these two dots here, these two different regions. So AWS consists of multiple regions, and within a region you have availability zone, and availability zones are nothing but two or more, usually three, but some regions may have two as well. The data centers which are interconnected by low latency, high bandwidth network, and these availability zones provide high availability within a region. And for disaster recovery, you can deploy servers across regions so that if one region fails, or if there's any problem in entire all the availability zones within a region, your services can be rendered or served from another region. So this provides high availability, disaster recovery, scalability, all those features that you need to run an enterprise application. Now, later when we are going to create these services in hands-on lab, you can see some how to create a service within a region. Now, this is I'm on a console of AWS, and by default, when you log in, you'll be logging in management console, and later you will be creating a hands-on lab, or you'll be creating an account so that you can practice these labs. So in this, right now, I'm on a AWS console, and this is where I'm selecting all the regions. So if I have to do or work on a particular region, right now I've selected US East, North Virginia, or I can go to US East, Ohio, and like that. These are US related data centers. This is Africa, Asia, Canada, Europe, and finally Middle East and South America. These are different regions in that. And as I said, within a region, let's suppose right now I'm in Ohio, which is in US East, and I need to create a service, and I'll tell you about a service as well. Let's suppose I'm computing an EC2, which is a elastic compute, which is nothing but a virtual machines, and I'm saying launch an instance. Again, we'll see that. Don't worry, we'll create these in subsequent labs. So I'm creating a Linux machine here. For example, I'm creating a Red Hat Linux. I select and I select a tier. So this is where I'm selecting a zone, and in this I'm selecting a US East 2A, 2B, and 2C. So these are the availability zones within US East 2A, 2B, and 2C. And if I say no preference, then it's going to go and create this machine in any availability zone. So this is a region, and within region you have availability zones. So that was about a region and availability zone. Now the question is, how do you select a particular region? As I showed earlier here, we are selecting region, but what are the criteria, why you have multiple regions, or what basis you select? So first is pricing. Now, first of all, pricing is not same for all the regions. Some region have a slightly lower, very minimal difference, but there might be some difference between the pricing across regions. Second is security and compliance requirement, which means your company may not want to have or you might have a regulation saying that your data can't go outside a particular region. So data, if you're in a US company or a US enterprise, your data should always reside within US. So that's another reason for security and compliance. Third could be user and customer location. So usually if you deploy your servers or services within a particular data centers or within a region, your users closest to that region will have the best performance or best response time. Now, there are different ways to improve that performance, like content delivery network. We'll see a little bit later, but you might have some. That's another reason people pick a specific region which are closest to their users. Then you have service availability. Not every service may not be available in every region or every availability zone. So depending on what the service is, you may pick a specific region. And then latency, as I said, the performance might have a user location. You want to keep it closer to user, or from the latency point of view as well. Some data centers, if you're closer to a specific data center or a region, you might get a better latency. Now, how to select a choose a region? I've already showed you earlier. From this drop down top right, you'll go and select a region. Now, availability zone, as I said, are multiple data centers. You have the multiple data centers in availability zone, and these data centers are interconnected by low latency and high throughput network, so that you can provide one machine here on one machine here, and two acting as an active for high availability, and you can create up to three. Now, one question keeps coming is, hey, if I have two machines, then will I be charged for two machines? Yes, you'll be charged depending on the number of machines. You'll be charged whether that's in one availability zone or across multiple availability zones or across multiple regions. So yes, you're going to that's it'll be charged accordingly. Now, within AWS, this is a diagram where you have a region, and a region has availability zone. And this is another region which with its own availability zones, and you can configure disaster recovery across two regions. So your servers can be, in case a region, as I said earlier, fails, it can DR or fail over to another one. I've already shown you how do you select a region and how do you select a zone within a for a virtual machine. Like that you can do for database and other applications as well. Now some services are global in nature, like for users, your users and groups will be deployed on globally. But you'll see that selecting, if you see here, I'm creating something that shows I'm creating it in US East 2. On the console, you will see when you select a region. So I'm in US East 2 and I'm selecting the machines here. So as I said earlier, AWS Global Infrastructure, there are 24 regions right now. And by the time you might be listening, there might be more. So they keep, AWS keeps adding on. There are 77 availability zones, and there are 245 countries and territories are being served by AWS. So with millions of active customers and tens and thousands of global partners, AWS has the largest and the most dynamic ecosystem. And customers across virtually every industry, be it finance, telecom, education, research, motor, retail industry and every size, maybe it's big, small, medium size, including startups, enterprises, public sector organizations are running their services on AWS. So that's AWS global infrastructure consisting of regions and availability zones. Now, we are going to look at AWS services, what all services are available in AWS. Now, this is an example. Traditionally, you'll be deploying the infrastructure, which was on the left-hand side, and this is the new way of doing things on the one which you have on right-hand side, which is the new way of doing things on cloud or in specific AWS cloud. So let's begin with the bottom. Underlying, you have storage, and storage you used to have a DAS, SAN, and NAS. DAS stands for directly attached storage, or storage area network for SAN, or network attached storage. Similar to that, in AWS world, you have EBS, which is elastic block storage, a different type of storage. And if you're watching this as a part of AWS Solution Architect, we'll go on these storage options as well. If you're watching this as a part of AWS DevOps, will give you some background, a little bit background. If you're just learning it, we'll go a little bit later on the storage. On this module, we'll go a little bit later on storage options as well. So you have EBS, which is elastic block storage, which is nothing but a block storage attached. You can attach it to your compute instance or a virtual machine. You have elastic file storage service, which is again network or NFS, network file share kind of a storage device, and S3, which is a simple storage service bucket. We'll see these storage options a little bit later in deep. Then you have servers. In on-premise, you used to have bare metal servers, physical servers, or a virtual machines. Similar to that, you have instances we call EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, or Elastic Cloud Compute, which is EC2 servers that you can build on cloud. Similarly, in networking, you used to have, or you have on-premise routers, network pipelines, switches. Similar to that, you have VPC, which is a virtual private cloud, or ELB, Elastic Load Balancers. You have a load balancers, Route 53, which is your DNS server, and so on. And then from security point of view, you have firewalls, access control list, administrators or users, global administrators. Similar to that, in AWS, you have security groups, which is nothing but a firewall at a server level. You have network attached access control list. You have identity and access management, which is for users, groups, roles, permissions, and so on. So whatever you could do in traditional infrastructure in on-premise, you can do same thing on cloud as well. So that's AWS versus traditional setup. Now, if you look at AWS services, AWS has the richest set of services or the most mature services model in cloud. So, and this is I'm talking about infrastructure service and platform as a service. So you have foundational level services, which are compute, which is nothing but your Linux or Windows virtual machines, and now you can have deploy Mac as well on, or you can also do something called as functions or containers, which is your EC2 instance or containers or microservices run. So this is where you have EC2, AWS Lambda, which is functions. Then you have from storage and content delivery network. Storage, you need some data store, and then something for quicker delivery of your web interface, which is content delivery on websites for caching purpose. And these are some of the applications or services which are available on storage and content. We'll go a little bit deep into these services. Then you have your databases and different type of database. You have Amazon DynamoDB, RDS. What these are, we'll see in subsequent lessons here. Then you have networking. And within networking, you have a Route 53, which is for DNS, VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, or AWS Direct Connect, which is on connecting your on-premise with cloud. And we'll see these networking concepts a little bit later. So these are the foundation level services which you have: compute, virtual machines, storage, networking, databases, and identity and access management as well. Then you have application services, which are basically provide the complete application in terms of administrative and security. You have directory services, which is your Active Directory or Microsoft Active Directory running on AWS Cloud, identity and access management. You have configuration management, Cloud Trail for auditing, and CloudWatch. These are some security related. Then you have how do you deploy the applications? So deploy and config management or automation like a cloud formation, or code deploy to deploy your, if you're working as a developer, how do you deploy those applications? And then you have analytics, different type of data related, analytics related, data pipeline related applications or services on as part of analytics. And then how do you deploy and manage these applications? So you have mobile services, you have application services like simple queue service or simple email service and so on. And then how do you monitor and watch and manage and search your application, which is simple elastic search as well. And then you have enterprise applications. These are applications come under your SaaS. You can count them as a kind of a SaaS, software as a service, which is your workspaces, emails, work email, something similar to your Office 365, where you say, I need a Word document, or I can work on email and so on. Then there is a mobile services for notification or analytics, mobile analytics, and so on. So this is a set of AWS services just to do a foundation, application services, and deploy management. Now we're going to go in detail in each of these services in subsequent lessons. Then you have AWS service in a different way for developers. If you're working on a developer, as a developer, you will have developer tools like code pipeline, code deploy, code build, and code commit. And if you're watching this set of videos as a part of AWS DevOps training, then we'll go in these in detail of all of these tools. You have application services, which is SCS, your simple. We'll look into these services a little bit later on, and we'll explain about all these 4 services. You have identity and access management, which is your users, groups, roles, policies, key management system, which is for managing like your SSL, TLS certificates, sensitive information. Then you have management tools like CloudWatch, CloudFormation for automation, CloudTrail for auditing, and trusted advisor to give you the feedback about your security, whether it works or it's fine or not. And OPS works will see for automating like your Chef, Puppet, and so on. Then these are management tools. From a networking point of view, you have virtual private cloud, which is to the services that provide network, your IP addresses, subnetting, gateways, routers, connecting to on-premise load balancers, a DNS server, and so on. From a storage and connectivity, these are some of the storage and content delivery. We'll see that in subsequent lesson later. Then you have different type of databases, your relational, non-relational, or NoSQL databases. Compute, which is your which provides basically a memory and CPU underlying. It could be any form. So you have EC2, which is your virtual machines. You have Elastic Beanstalk. We'll see that it's a web apps. Lambda, Amazon Lambda, which is functions or function as a service. And you have Elastic Load Balancers and auto scaling features. You have storage, which is about your EBS, Elastic Block Storage, File Storage Service, Simple Storage, which is your object storage. So these are all a rich set of AWS services. This is another view of the same which I've discussed. So you have compute, different compute services, you have networking, you have storage and content delivery network, you have databases, you have identity and access management, and finally the management tools. And we'll see all of these in subsequent lessons one by one. Now, this is a set of all the services are available, and I'll show you on the program or in the console how do you go and see these services. So I'm back on the console. Let me close this. This is how you will see when you log into the console. You will see AWS Management Console. And from here on, from this drop down, you will select this. Now, later in this, we'll share a step-by-step hands-on guide as well as video on how to create an account on AWS so that you can log in and access. Once you log in, you will come onto the console. And if you click on this triangle here, click on this, and this is where you will see all the services which I shared earlier. So this is compute, this is all the storage, this is databases. And if you go scroll down, this is your migration and transfer related services. This is your identity and access management security compliance. This is your containers, where we'll see Docker, Kubernetes, and containers as well, which are quite hot in the market right now. This is for IoT things if you're working on IoT. So this is a complete set of all the services. You can go to a specific service by clicking on from here, or you can type onto, if you know the service, you can simply type, for example, I'm doing EC2, or I'm doing storage, which is S3 buckets, or I'm doing networking, so I'll do VPC here, and so on. So that's list of services that you have on AWS. We're going to look at identity and access management service, which helps in securing, which stands for users, groups. How do you secure your resources? Everything about that in identity and access management. So what is IAM service? It's a security control for individuals or a group of users access to all your AWS resources, be it like storage, networking, your databases, your Linux virtual machines, networking, all application services, everything that you are doing on or you can do in AWS cloud. How do you access that is about identity and access management. There's other things as well, like your key management, but we'll in this lesson we're going to focus on the core IAM services, which are your users, groups, roles, and policies. So what are these? We'll look into that. And you control your passwords. Multi-factor authentication, we'll cover that as well. What is multi-factor authentication and so on. Your access keys and all those services under identity and access management. So first, let's begin with the overview about these four main things within AWS, which is users, groups, policies, and roles. So the users, IAM users, are the individuals like you and me with a set of permissions, the one who can log in to the console, or you can log in through command line or do something on cloud, AWS cloud. So users typically have credentials, which means it could be a password, it could be a key, or it could be something to either make an API call, which is application programming interface calls, or they probably might be doing it from the console or different ways to access the AWS resources. So that's IAM users. Whereas groups is collection of IAM users, which have similar set of permissions. So I can say one department, put them into one group and give them a specific access. So all the IAM users are in a group, in a particular group, can access the resources by giving them a specific set of permissions to that group. The IAM policies dictate or specifies the permissions that you want to give to either a user or to a group or to a role. And then IAM role is a set of permissions that you assign so that you can make a request to that AWS service. Request could be accessing it, deleting it, creating it, maybe editing it. So set of permissions that you can apply, and then that role can be assigned to either a user or to a group or to an application or maybe a service itself. So role is something similar to user on which you can apply the permissions, but the major difference between user and role is that user will have a credential, which means either a key or a password or something to log in or access those resources, whereas role is just a set of resources. You don't log in through that role is assigned to a user or a set of a resource. I hope that makes sense. Now let me tell you, let me go and show it to you on the console where you will be able to create or manage these. Just play with them. We'll have, depending on which guide you are picking, we might be definitely playing with some users and groups and permissions and policies and so on. So I'm on the console. So I'm going to first pick up from here identity and access management, and which is under security identity IAM, or you simply go here and search for IAM and then click on this service, which is manage access to the AWS resources. And this is where you have groups, users, roles, policies, and there are other things as well. But let me go and go to and if you want to do multi-factor authentication, what are those? I'll cover that in a minute. But first, let's go to here users. And right now, I don't have any IAM user, and we'll cover that. Brings to the next point, what is a users? And if you see here now, on the top here, you see my region, which I talk about is a global. So my users identity and access management is a global service, which is applicable for all entire region, all the regions. It's not specific to a specific region. So it's a global service, and IAM does not require any region selection. That's why, because it's a global service. So this was users, groups, policies, roles. Let's first look at AWS users. As I said earlier, user is an identity that can access AWS resources, and you set permissions on that user. That user you can integrate with external directory services like Microsoft Active Directory, or integrate with and you can log in via externally as well on that users. Now users in AWS are two type: root user and IAM user. I'll explain these both. But root user is the global user that gets created when your account is created first time. So you can't delete that user. That's kind of a super user. And root user, and let me show you what I mean by root user and IAM user. So if you see any user that I'm creating under here under users, these are identity and access management users. And if I create them, then they will be able to log in to the AWS console. Let me first log out from here. So I'll click here, I've logged in, and click on sign out. And when I'm trying to sign into the console, if you see first time you're logging in, it says root user. The user that you create first time that has a kind of a super user that has full privileges, you'll be logging it as user that. And then later you can create multiple sub users and give them the right kind of a role or access so that you can create. And for those users, they'll be logging as a IAM user, and they will first need an account ID, which basically when you create, you'll get that account ID. In my case, it's the account I'll show you in a minute as well. So this is the root user, and I'll be logging in as my user ID, which is a super user. And this is my super user. I'll log in as password. And now I'm inside that my console, and I can then go and search for my look and then create my additional users. So these will be my IAM users. So right now I don't have any IAM user. I have just one root user. I have 12 roles. I have no groups, and and the policies, there are two policies, customer managed policies. There are default policies that comes. We'll see what the policy is. So this is my root user. Similar to that, I can create additional users with identity and access management users and give them necessary policies or apply some permissions. Policy is nothing but set of permissions that you can apply on a user or a group so that they can see what they can do, or policies will control what they can do or can't do in terms of whether they can access, manage, delete, create, and so on these resources. Now MFA stands for multi-factor authentication. So when you saw that I was logging in, I was just logging in with the user ID, but single password only. This only thing was I was just giving my password, and that's not secure. So what I can do is I can come here and enable multi-factor authentication. So when they are logging in, it's going to prompt them for more than one password. It's not just password, it'll prompt me password, but one more factor of authentication, which means that could be my one-time token, which I can get on an app like Google Authenticator, or a message on my phone, or an email message, or a token on my email. So that's multi-factor authentication. We'll have a labs later in the program for you how to enable multi-factor authentication. Now, group is nothing but collection of users on which you can apply the policies. So that rather than giving permissions on individual users, you can put them into groups so you can then apply policies on that. Now, policy is nothing but set of instructions or permissions which will grant necessary access on resources. Resources could be in this case bucket, which is nothing but my storage, a simple storage service, a bucket. Or you can also granularize them and say I have a full access, I have a read-only access, I have specific access you can grant. And then finally, a role. So role is, as I said earlier, is an identity that you can create in your account that's specific and that has specific permissions. So in this particular case, I've created a role. For example, in this diagram here, I've created a role called AWS service role for Amazon EKS. EKS is a Kubernetes service. So I'm creating a role which will give them permissions to manage my Elastic Kubernetes service. And whosoever has that role, whether it's a user or it's a group or it's an instance, that particular identity will be able to work on that or will have those permissions. So roles are similar to IAM user. The only difference, as I said, is that they can be associated. They are not just linked to one user. They can be applied to multiple users, that a role, and you can grant and access, revoke a role to a user, and role does not have a password similar to or like the way you have in IAM user. So that's a role. And this is the relationship between users, groups, policy, and a role. So there is a many-to-many relationship between users and groups. Now, the policies which governs permissions can be applied to a user, it can be applied to a group, or it can be applied to a role. And role can be applied again to a user or a group, or a user or group can have a role. So that's relationship between users, groups, and policies. Now, if you're part of if you're part of AWS Solution Architect training program, we'll do some labs on these. And if you're part of AWS DevOps, again, in AWS DevOps, when we are creating access control, when we are creating command line interface, or when we are giving permissions onto, we'll be creating some roles later in the program in the respective labs. So that is identity and access management, users, groups, and roles and policies. We're going to look at compute service. Now, compute in a very simple terms is nothing but something that can be helped in processing. And in processing, you need a CPU processor as well as memory, these two things. And depending on the kind of application, you have different options. As you see, there's a EC2, which is a ECS. We'll explain all these things, like Amazon Lightsail, Amazon EKS, which is a Kubernetes service, Elastic Beanstalk, Lambda, Batch, and Fargate, what these are. And as I said earlier, if you want to see all these services you go, for related to compute, you go to the console and look under compute or containers. So I'm under here, you drop down this I'm on AWS console under services, you look at these are all compute, and I've mentioned the most common ones as well are there. And then if you scroll down further down, this is your containers, which is your Docker, Kubernetes, containerized, container-based, or your microservices-based applications. So let's first look at what is EC2. EC2 as stands is Elastic Compute Cloud, which is nothing but your virtual machines. So you create a virtual machines on which you can, it's like your laptop you have or a server you have, you can create a virtual machine of different shape. And shape means here is you have, you're creating how much memory and CPU you want to assign or allocate for that virtual machine. And then you can attach storage. You'll get a by default some storage with the machine or instance we call, or Elastic Compute Cloud. And then you can configure networking and load balancers in front if required as well. Again, we'll go into in detail about this EC2 in the respective modules, and you'll be able to create a Linux and Windows machine as well, and we'll show you how to do that as well. So that's EC2. Then Lambda, which is nothing but a function. If you have heard of function as a service, which means you you, for example, you say I have I want a service which I'll give two numbers and it'll do me sum of that. So I'll give A and B, which is A number maybe 2 and 3. Sum of that 5. So all you need is pass on two parameters A and B, and it'll give you the sum of those A and B. So that's a function. Or you give instruction. If you might have heard of Alexa, or which is a AWS device based. You give an instruction, you can say, hey Alexa, play a song, it'll do that, or maybe switch on the light or switch off the music, and so on. So that's nothing but we are giving a set of instructions on and it'll do that particular task, you without being worry what is the underlying infrastructure required for that. So that's Amazon Lambda. So Lambda, you write functions, and you can write that functions in your language of your choice. You can write it on Node.js, you can write on Python, Go, Java, or more. So you build an application, or you get a compute for that on Lambda if you're implementing function without having to worry about any server, how do you scale, all those things, and you pay based on execution of that function. So that's Amazon Lambda. Then you have AWS Beanstalk, which is nothing but deploying a web application and services. Your web application, you create a web application that can be accessed over the browser. Your custom application, that application can be written on Java, .NET, PHP, Python, Ruby, Go, Docker, any language. Um, and you might be typically deploying them on Apache, Nginx, Passenger, or IIS. So Beanstalk will help you. You simply upload your code, and Elastic Beanstalk will automatically handle the deployment, what all servers needs to be done, load balancing, everything will be done for you by Elastic Beanstalk. So that's a web app, packaged web app on for your server. Then you have a light sail, which is nothing but if you have a website, it's a easy to build and scalable website. If you want any website requirement without having to worry about the backend database or how much server capacity and everything, you can go on a cost-effective monthly plan of, and say maybe $5 a month for hosting your website. And as your website grows, user base grows, you can increase that monthly plan and give you better spec website as well. So Amazon Lightsail for that. Then you have Docker and Kubernetes in ECS, in the sense of ECS, AKS, and Fargate. So if you look at the ECS, EKS, and Fargate, these are all three of them are containerized solutions, and containerized basically are uh, underlying infrastructure on which you run your microservices. So typically, again, we have a dedicated module where we go deep into these topics, but for now, assume these are container solution on which your microservices run. So ECS is a container orchestration, containerization or container platform, including orchestration that was created and managed by AWS. So whatever container, if you ever heard of Docker, you run implementation of Docker in AWS world is ECS, which is a container orchestration managed by AWS. Similarly, you have Kubernetes, which is an open source software to orchestrate, manage containers, and implementation of that Kubernetes on AWS cloud we call managed Kubernetes is called as EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, which is a managed Kubernetes on AWS. And the serverless version of both containers and Kubernetes, or Docker and Kubernetes, the serverless version of ECS and EKS is Fargate, which is container on demand. So we have a dedicated bonus module where we go in detail about ECS, EKS, and Fargate. So we'll cover that in that a little bit more. But for the time being, assume there is a ECS, EKS, Fargate, which is serverless implementation, or Docker and Kubernetes implementation on AWS cloud. Now, then you have the last service, which is in compute under is batch. So your companies might have a requirement to run a batch job, like for example, a daily transfer to maybe a banks, or files to be processed, or a month-end batch processing job, or month-end or year-end, and so on. So AWS batch gives developers the batch processing computing on AWS. With AWS batch, you can plan, schedule, and execute your batch and computing workloads. Now, if you want to go and see how to create these, you simply go back under services here, and under compute related services, you will see here EC2, Lifestyle, Lambda, Batch, Elastic Beanstalk, which we saw. Now, serverless application repository is basically for storing and sharing the repository for serverless applications. Outpost is basically deploying servers, but on premise, which is outside the AWS cloud, but it's customer premises AWS Outpost. EC2 image builder is basically for building your images. So containers run using images, and image is nothing but your collection of your underlying operating system and the libraries and binaries of that. So that's EC2 here. And bottom here, containers. This is what ECR, Elastic Container Registry, for image storing your images. This is something similar to Docker Hub. ECS, Elastic Container Service, which is your Docker implementation and orchestration, and container orchestration, as well as container runtime on AWS, managed by AWS. And EKS is a Kubernetes implementation, as we saw earlier. So this is all compute. We are going to look at AWS storage services. Now, if you're familiar, or if you're not from a storage background, it's always good to know that there are three type of files or three type of storage services. You have something called as object storage, that's on right hand side, the block storage, which is in the middle, and the file storage, which is files or which is written on left. If you're not familiar with what all of these, it's always good to Google, and I'll probably will be adding some notes that will help you to understand block, object, or file storage service. So first is the object, and object is nothing but object store is nothing but a store in which you have a flat kind of a files, like your images, your movies, your static files, Word document, PDF documents, any backups that you do. That's an object storage. Then you have a block, which is like, for example, the data is written in a block by block basis on a server. So the file storage that's attached to a virtual machine on which you install your operating system. That's like boot volume we call, or operating system. You have a block storage for that, or you have your databases installed on a block storage, and so on. So that's a block. And then third one is file storage service, or file type of where you have the data which is mounted, or the storage which is mounted across different servers on a NFS, network file server structure, where you have hierarchies. You create folders and subfolders if you're coming from a Linux background. Now you can create folders and subfolders on a block as well, but file is mainly you have shared across the network. You have a mount on which you install the file system, and then you mount that file system using an NFS protocol on different ways. Again, if you're not coming from a storage background, don't worry too much for now. Just understand that there is an object storage, you have a block storage, and you have a file storage. And this is a generic term. That's not AWS specific. That's a generic file storage options that are available in public. And within that, each block, object, and file, Amazon AWS has a storage service, which is Amazon S3, which is here simple storage service, which is S3 stands for simple storage service for storing the object type of your files, or file objects like images, GIFs, as I said, for backup and so on. There's also a Amazon Glacier, which is for the huge amount of data, which has less you're not using that often, that kind of a data, mainly for auditing purpose. So let's suppose big companies have a requirement to store the data for maybe 7 years for audit purpose. You can put them into a Glacier. You have a lot of data there, for example. So these are two services which are coming from an object related. Block service, block, you have EBS, Elastic Block Storage, which is a block storage that when you install an operating system, you need a block storage. Or you can also have an EC2 instance store, and that EC2 instance store is a temporary location. We'll cover that when we go a little bit deep into storage services, depending on which program you're attending on this. So on Amazon Solution Architect, we are going to go deep into these EC2 instance store and so on. Then you have file storage, which is EFS, which is mainly for Linux. So EFS currently is supported on Linux only, but if you need a shared file system like that, which is mounted on a server, for Linux you have EFS, and then for Windows you have FSX. Again, not covered here, but we'll go when we look at the storage module, we'll go deep into that particular topic. So this is for three type of storage services, main categories, but different services within that storage. And then you have a data transfer. Basically, how do you transfer data from on-premise to cloud or between cloud to cloud? Or so these are some of the data transfer options you have on for this. So let's look at these services one by one. So Amazon S3, that stands for simple storage service. It's a durable object storage for all type of data. It's very economical, very cheap. You go pay as you go model. There's no upfront investment and there's no commitment like, oh, you need to retain it for at least 2 months or you need to pay at least 1 month, 2 months or a year. Whatever number of days you pay or hours and minutes you store, you pay for that. It's highly durable. Durable means that it's automatically multiple copies are stored at different places within AWS cloud. So if there's an underlying file system corruption, AWS will take care of that. Then Amazon Glacier, it's mainly for archival storage for infrequently accessed data, which means you're not using them quite regularly. It's mainly for auditing. As I said, some financial institutes, for example, have a requirement to store data for 7 years. So, or for backup and backups of your databases or applications. It's easy to use. It's self-administrative, and it also comes with SDK software development kit for integrations. Then you have Amazon EBS, which is a block storage and for use with EC2 instances, Amazon EC2 instances. It reduces risk. It's durable. It's secure. As well EBS, and this is the block storage for which is required for a virtual machine, running a virtual machine for operating system or storing the data. Then you have EFS, which is a file storage service. It's mainly for, as I said, network file storage. It's agile, it's scale. You can quickly go. It's slightly expensive than S3 or EBS, but you can, if you have a requirement where multiple servers needs to mount the same file system or see and write and read from the same file system, that's when this EFS will come to your rescue. So that's about storage service. Again, let me show it to a console. Again, if you go here onto console under services, let me expand here on storage here. Storage, this is S3. So I'm going to go and create S3 for my storage bucket. Let me go and see. EFS, I said earlier, FSX is basically the file storage service for Windows workload. S3 Glacier we already covered. Storage gateway is basically to transfer your file from one point to another point, like on-premise to cloud and so on. And then for AWS backups, it's mainly, as name suggests, for backup. So I can go and S3, which is I can create a simple storage service, which is I can create a bucket and store the data. So I can say create a bucket and I can copy the data into this bucket using drag and drop from the browser, or you can select a file, or you also have command line interface CLI through which you can copy the data from on-premise. And there are third-party tools as well to migrate the data to the bucket. So that's about simple storage service. We are going to look at network services, what these network services mean, and what all services are available in this category for AWS. So if you see the network, we also call in AWS called VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, is nothing but a set of continuous IP addresses that makes a network, and you get your IP addresses for the machine, which is a virtual machine or a load balancer or any resource or a database host or a machine through this set of IPs. That network is we call VPC, and that network is further broken down into smaller networks we call subnet. So you have, if you are coming from an application architecture background, you have a database tier, web tier, and application tier. So we deploy this database tier in one subnet, application tier in another subnet, and then the web tier on another subnet. And subnet here is nothing but logical collection of set of IP addresses, which will then host your database or virtual machine and so on. So this is a virtual, these dotted line represents a virtual private cloud or VPC. So VPCs span across in a region. So you can have within a region multiple availability zones, all covered by this VPC here. And within that VPC, you have subnets. And in subnet, you create machines. Then you also have routers and gateways. And there are different type of gateways. And one of them is Internet Gateway, which helps any machine running on the AWS cloud to connect to the internet, or outgoing connection will go to the internet from these machines through this internet gateway, or any machine, any machine that you want to connect to the cloud will be connecting via this internet gateway if it's running on a public IP address. What is public IP? What is private IP? If you're not clear with these, we are going to cover in the respective networking module. If you're watching this video or this lesson in our AWS Solution Architect training. So this is your internet gateway and routers. You also have load balancers under the networking, and a role of network load balancer, or a role of load balancer is to distribute or balance the load across different servers running under different availability zones within a zone or across availability zone. So you have machine 1 running in this here and machine 2 running in this here, and all these machines are part of one VPC, and I can deploy a load balancer and distribute the traffic between machine 1 and machine 2. So if a request comes, there are different algorithms on which I can distribute the traffic. Maybe I can say round robin, which is say first request go to instance 1, second request instance 2, or I can say 50 or 75% of the weightage goes to this instance and 25% goes to this instance. So that's load balancers. Then there is another service called Route 53, which is domain name service, DNS. And you can configure DNS in AWS so that your request, which is coming over the internet, can then be distributed to the backend servers. In this case, EC2, which is Linux or Windows machines. And then from there, it's fetching the data from S3 storage bucket. So this is a user which is getting the route from a Route 53 and then forwarding request that Route 53 will have, and say some content coming from my static website, which is stored on S3 buckets, and another coming from another piece of data, which is dynamic coming from EC2. So Route 53 is nothing but a DNS service in AWS. And then you can also have a cloud front, which is nothing but a content delivery network. So what happens is that typically if my website is hosted in US, if I'm accessing this website from US compared to another person accessing this website from Asia, because the person in US is closer to that website hosting, typically that speed or the response time is going to be quicker if a person is coming from US. So what I can do is, that is because that person in US is closer to the hosting or where my website is hosted. Now, in order to speed up, you can do content delivery, which means, or you can set up content delivery network in Asia so that the data is being cached in closer to the location from where user is accessing that data, and only the dynamic data or data that have changed will be fetched from the server, a backend server, and then brought into CDN. And anytime the data changes, the fresh copy is pulled up by CDN, so that data stays closer to the person who's accessing, and that's called as content delivery network. So Amazon's cloud front is a content delivery network which securely delivers data, videos, applications, and APIs to connect your backend services for low latency and high transfer speed. Your developers can configure CDN in front of your website. So that's CloudFront. And then final service in networking on a high level is Connect, or AWS Direct Connect, which is establishing a dedicated connection between your on-premise and AWS cloud. So this is a diagram where this is your customer premises and this is my AWS cloud. I can typically connect it over the internet, but that's maybe not be secure, or the connection might not be that fast because I'm relying on my wide area network WAN for internet speed. Other option is I can configure a direct connect, which will be a dedicated pipe between my AWS cloud and on-premise. So that reduces the latency issues and increases the bandwidth output because I have a dedicated pipe. So these are some of the high-level overview about networking. And as I said, as you go and create instances, you will create by default, AWS comes with a default VPC. So you will be able to create additional VPCs or subnets, and you will be able to, there are default gateways, and you can add more gateways if required. You can configure load balancers and Route 53 and content delivery network CDN. So this is me here back onto the console. Let me go back to this console. This is how the console will look like. Hold on one second. So this is I'm on S3 bucket. Let me expand it. And then from services, I go to the networking. So this is where this is my VPC Cloud Front Route 53 API gateway, something for application programming interface. We'll cover that a little bit later, but mainly you need to worry about VPC and Route 53. So I go to VPC, and this is where you will see all my private clouds. There's a default VPC that comes out of the box, and you can create more additional VPCs here. So if you see, I have one VPC defined in London. There are 3 subnets within that VPC. There's a route table, which is for routing traffic outside the AWS or within from one VPC to another VPC. Internet gateway is for my connecting to internet or connections coming from internet to AWS world. Egress is outgoing internet gateways. Elastic IPs, I have set of IPs which always stay same. I can retain that IP even on the my virtual machines life cycle, which means my machine stops and restart, I retain that IP. Or if I create a new terminate this instance and create a new instance, and my IPs, I want to assign the same IP, that's elastic IPs. There's a NAT gateway, which is for NATing. If request is coming to a NAT gateway, which will then can forward it to my backend services. That's NAT if you're coming from networking background. And some of these things we'll cover a little bit later. My network access control list and security group these are firewalls. Network access control is a firewall at a subnet level, whereas security group is a firewall at a instance or a machine level, and so on. We're going to look at another important service on AWS, which is database services. Now, database is nothing but where you might have heard of relational databases, where the data is stored in tables, which is in rows and columns. And since then, there's a new different type of database have come across. So we're trying to look at all the database services that are available on cloud, which are commonly used. And first of them is Amazon RDS. That stands for Relational Database Service, mainly for OLTP, online transaction processing. So you transact some, let's suppose you do the transaction with your bank, or you buy something, the record of that is stored in a relational database, which is a transactional database to store all your transactions that happened. And for that, there are multiple databases like Oracle database or SQL database or MySQL database or different type of relational database. So Amazon RDS provides all these relational database services in the cloud, which is called as RDS for Oracle or RDS for MySQL or RDS for different database types. So if you see, this is my RDS, which is RDS for Amazon MariaDB, RDS for Aurora, RDS for Oracle. Amazon Aurora is AWS's proprietary database. Oracle database is from Oracle, but the deployment of that Amazon RDS on for Oracle or for Microsoft SQL or MySQL or Postgres. These are RDS, basically relational data services. All those in platform as a service PaaS model. We looked at PaaS, what is service models in past. So that platform as a service model, RDS, that's a relational database. Then you have a DynamoDB, which is a key value pair database and document database that delivers single digit millisecond performance at any scale. It's fully managed, multi-regional, multi-master durable database, meaning that let's suppose I want to have key value pair and say product number, and product number this and description this. So you might have seen an example, just to give an example, you might have seen Amazon's, when you shop, it fetches the data about product description. It might be coming from key value pair or a document database to fetch the properties of that product. So it's very, very scalable. The performance is quite fast and fully managed across multiple regions, multiple master copies and durable database. So that's Amazon DynamoDB. You can create them if you have that business requirement. Another one is Amazon Redshift, which is OLAP, which is an online analytical processing. So you had OLTP, which is where you see a lot of writes into the database. OLAP is mainly for analytics purpose. So you want to do a reporting, maybe monthly reporting, yearly reporting, or analytics to do the processing about what you can then run some reports around that. So that's OLAP kind of a data store. So Redshift is a Amazon's proprietary OLAP database, which makes it simple and cost effective to run high performance queries on petabytes of structured data. So again, it's a structured data, which is your relational data, which has rows and columns, so that you can build your powerful reports and dashboards using existing BI, business intelligence tools on that. So if you're coming from a database background or a reporting background, that's when a Redshift is for OLAP right, kind of services. Then there's another data which is called as Elastic Cache, which is an in-memory data for sub-milliseconds latency to power internet scale real-time applications. So applications that need very quick response. You might have seen my transaction when I'm using my credit card and I'm doing some billing, I get data very quickly, or I need very, very low latency, which means very quick turnaround time. In such scenarios, you can have the entire database is usually stored in a storage service in behind on the disk. That could be quite time consuming. So what you do is you fetch the entire data from that disk onto the memory of the database, and that memory is quicker to respond. So that's Elastic Cache is in-memory database. Then you have Amazon Aurora, which is a relational database from AWS, which is similar to like MySQL or Postgres compatible relational database that's built for cloud by proprietary again from AWS. That's basically for performance and availability for all OLTP, online transaction processing database, which is open source database again. So this is Aurora. Now, as I said, Amazon RDS, you can go and create RDS by going to relational create database. RDS we looked at earlier, and when you go and say I want to create a RDS, you then gets an option which kind of a RDS it is. Is it Aurora, MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, Oracle, and so on. So let me go back onto again here console, AWS console, and let's see from a database point of view. Again, depending on what application or under what training you're watching this, you probably we might go and deep into this. So this is where RDS, this is my relational data services, or if I go under services and let me scroll here in databases. So this is a database. I have RDS, DynamoDB, Elastic Cache, and then there's another new database is coming up, but this is document DB. So I'm going to go into RDS because that's quite commonly used if you want a relational database like Oracle on AWS or relational data services on AWS and so on. So if you come across, I'm saying create a database. This is right now we are creating a relational data services on AWS. So now here, from which kind of an engine you want? Do you want Oracle database or SQL database or Postgres or Aurora or MySQL or MariaDB? So these are some of the options available, and you can go and select different configuration depending on what kind of a database you select, and you click on create database and you can have the database already. So that's database. So that completes your data base services on AWS cloud. And we're going to look at automation and configuration management on AWS. So if you might have seen some of these or have heard, the infrastructure automation is basically setting up your servers, automating the build, and then configuration on top of that server, then installing applications on top of the underlying infrastructure and on the server, and then finally deploy any additional configurations or post-deployment configuration changes. There are different open source tools and services available, right from Packer, Terraform, Cloud Init, Vagrant, SaltStack, Ansible, Puppet, Chef are some of the common ones. And from the context of AWS, so Terraform is quite common, and so is your CloudFormation. Now, Terraform is an open source from a company called HashiCorp, but similar to that, automation of cloud build, like your servers are setting up in automatically using using a script or using a infrastructure as a code, which means you write a code to deploy the setup. Now, you may not be writing that code from scratch. You might be picking up an existing code and updating configuration, updating that to create or automate the server build. So that's what is CloudFormation is. So CloudFormation gives you a tool or a model for to model a collection of AWS resources and third-party resources to provision them quickly, consistently, and manage that through a life cycle by treating infrastructure as code, which means you write a piece of code and say create, and it'll create. You run another command with the option called delete, it'll delete, or update, it'll update. So all those things you can do through this CloudFormation. And it'll also take care of any dependency if required. So you can take all of them. You can build your cloud infrastructure within a minute once you have written that code, and you can destroy as well. So that's quite useful in CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment tools. CloudFormation is one of them. Then you have a ops work, which is a configuration management. Once your server is built or once your network is laid out, database are built, servers are built, you can do additional configuration on top of that. So let's suppose I have a virtual machine. I want to install a web server. That's my requirement on top of, or I have to have a specific type of network setting on the server, or I create 2 additional users by default every time a server is created, or I want to integrate that server with Active Directory or Microsoft Active Directory. So that's additional configuration on top of that. And that's handled by OpsWorks, which is a configuration management service that provides either Chef or Puppet. Chef and Puppet are additional third-party open source tools for configuration management. So you can integrate Chef and Puppet so that you can automate the configuration of services on AWS through OpsWorks. There's a third service which is called a Stack, which is nothing but your piece of code that you can invoke for configuration. So OpsWorks let you use either Chef or Puppet or the Stack to automate how servers are configured, deployed, and managed across your EC2 instance, which is Elastic Compute Cloud or Elastic Cloud Compute, or on-premise cloud. So that's what is OpsWorks. Let me show you on OpsWorks and CloudFormation on AWS Cloud. So this is on AWS CloudFormation. Just simply type here on CloudFormation and CloudFormation, and then you can go and click on this here. And there's a concept called Stack. Stack is nothing but collection of your resources that you want to build together as a part of automation. So in order to create a machine, I need to have a network and a subnet. So if you don't already have a subnet or a network, or you want to create that new network with creation of machine, I can create them as a stack. Or another one, something similar, OpsWorks. So you type here OpsWorks and click on OpsWorks. And then there are 3 options for OpsWorks. You can do OpsWorks for a Chef, Puppet, and then you can also have for Stack. So all the 3 options within OpsWorks. Now, when you're doing OpsWorks, the life cycle of OpsWorks is you first do a setup. And in this phase, when you start the instance, when the boot up starts, so basically you have servers built and servers are booting up. At the time you do the setup. So that part is the setup phase is immediately after the instance boot up. Boot up means startup has completed, and then use for initial set of installations. So you can say that, oh, install a web server after a machine is being built. So that's one. Then you comes the configuration. So once the server becomes online, so it's boot up, and then before it becomes available to the user, it comes into the online mode. So when online mode is completed or enters, you can do the configuration. So this is to ensure whether your configuration is up to date or not in this phase. Then you have a deploy phase where you deploy your application or set of services on top of that your or servers. And deploy phase, basically when you delete an app or configuration running on a server, and shutdown is occurs before you terminate, which means you completely delete that resource from AWS. You do the shutdown event on that. So these are some of these different events which helps in ops work. Again, depending on which training you're attending, we might go deep into these respective lessons or classes. So that's automation and configuration management, which is cloud formation and ops work. We're going to look at auditing and monitoring, where audit dictates who did what and when and why, so you can track back, and monitoring is to make sure that system is behaving as expected. So first, let's look at CloudWatch. First of the service is CloudWatch in this field, which is a monitoring service. So CloudWatch is a monitoring and observability service targeted for DevOps engineers, operations, site reliability engineers, or managers to make sure that your system is behaving as expected on that. So CloudWatch provides you all the data, insights of actionable insights, which helps in monitoring your applications and respond to a system-wide performance changes. So to make sure that let's suppose your website response time needs to be under a second, whether it's behaving that way or not, is all the services are working as expected or not. And it also gives you a single view of your operational health of the system. Now, you can also use CloudWatch to detect any anomalies in behavior of your environment. So like suppose every time it takes 30 seconds or maybe 5 seconds, or system takes whatever number of seconds to respond to a request, and if it goes above that, then it notifies you. You can set alarms, you can set notifications, you can trigger maybe calls onto the system so that respective person can handle that. Or you can also set actionable items or actionable automated actions, basically. So you can say send a message or inform someone, or maybe start another instance and so on. The CloudWatch will also help you in troubleshooting any issues and discover insights into the application that tackles if there's any problem. So that's CloudWatch. So this is a architecture of CloudWatch. Basically, you have a metric server inside that is constantly monitoring the performance of your underlying virtual machines, the applications running on top of that, and it's feeding the data into the other systems like statistics and alarm, which is using other services like SNS. And then you have things like simple notification service to notify your systems. And you can access these from the AWS console as well. Then you have a Cloud Trail, which is nothing but your auditing purpose. It basically tracks who did what and when. So let's suppose you modify, you delete, or someone changes the configuration, it will track all this. So Cloud Trail is an auditing system which enables governance, compliance, auditing, and risk auditing of your AWS account. So it's constantly tracking the logs, monitoring the system, and retaining all the data into the audit event log system. CloudTrail provides you events on history of AWS account, whether you're doing it from command line, you're doing from APIs, you're doing it from AWS console. It will track all of these so that if your security team wants to know, you can audit this, you can track the system, what happened, or you can go back onto the changes that happened. It will also help you in troubleshooting some of the issues that could be related to security or normal audit compliance point of view. So that's CloudTrail. This is an architecture where you have configurations being changed either from the AWS console or SDK software development kit or command line, which are monitoring or modifying different services. So CloudTrail will pick up any event changes and store into either you can store in a bucket, it will store, or you can source that events onto the external system for auditing purpose. And then you can send notifications through SNS, which is simple notification service, which I'll see a little bit later. So what we are doing here, we have 3 different cloud trails, which is sending the data to the AWS bucket, and that bucket you can then generating events and using functions, which is Lambda that we saw earlier, and feeding the data into my security information and event management SIM system. I'm feeding that data. So that's AWS Cloud Trail. So for auditing monitoring purpose, you have CloudWatch as well as CloudTrail. Then we're going to look at some of the application services we provide help or things like SNS, which is a simple notification service, SCS, which is simple email service, SQS, a simple queue service, and simple workflow service. So let's begin with simple notification service. Now, as name suggests, this is a fully managed messaging service for both application to application or application to person. So let's suppose I have an application which need to notify for to give an example, I have a new invoice ready for me to approve as a business user. So the application can send a email or a SMS message or a pager or whatever form of notification to a person, say do so and so, or just maybe notify a person. So that's one way of notification. Or another one is application to application notification. So maybe I can say if a data is stored into a storage bucket, then notify maybe another system to pick that or do some processing on that data. So that's notification. It's basically on a pub sub model. You have a publisher and you have a subscriber that provides high throughput push-based many-to-many messaging. So you can have multiple systems sending the message and multiple systems receiving the system as well. So that's simple notification service that can also be used. For example, you have a simple notification service a topic that your publishers can send the data and then send it out to multiple subscribers. That subscribers could be through a simple SQS queue or AWS Lambda function HTTP message for parallel processing. So to give an example here, I have a message publisher which want to publish the message, which could be whatever form of message that is. Now my simple notification service will fan out and give it to, maybe depending on what the configuration you have, it can send it to simple queue service for sending further processing. It can send a message to or notification to Lambda function for doing some processing, or it can do a HTTP endpoint call or maybe a webhook call, so that it can then further in turn call any other HTTP based service. So that's simple notification service. Then you have a simple queue service, which is basically a message queue implementation on AWS cloud. So you have multiple, let's suppose to give a very simple example, you have a order system, and that simple order management system has a lot of messages in terms of processing. For example, processing multiple different type of messages, and depending on different requirement, you can have first in first out, which means all the messages will be processed in a particular order, or it can be in you can put some other message queue or message algorithms for that queue. So simple queue service is a fully managed queue service that enables you to decouple and scale microservices, distributed services, systems, and serverless applications. So using queue service, you can send, store, and receive messages between different components without you having to worry about losing any messages or availability or any other scalability requirement. Now you can use the simple queue service either using Web Service Console or AWS Console, command line interface, or SDK in simple queue service. So this is an example of where I'm using simple notification service and simple queue service to do some processing. It's like basically where if you have worked on Java messaging queues, JMS in applications, so something similar on AWS cloud. Then you have a simple email service, which is, let's suppose you have to send some transactional emails where, let's suppose you've provisioned the server and you want to notify the end user saying server is ready, or you want to send in for marketing bulk emails. So it can send out thousands of users or subscribers all the emails. So simple email service SES is a cost-effective, flexible, and scalable email service that helps developers to send emails from within any application. It can be a transactional email, which means like something happened and you want to inform user for a transaction. Transaction could be maybe a server being provisioned or application being deployed and so on. Or it could be marketing message or mass email for communication. You can use this simple email service. Now, one of the important criteria in simple email service is that, or for deliverability of your email service, if the email is received by Google, or for example, you're using Gmail, I'm using Gmail and I'm getting a call or email from my AWS SCS, the health of that SCS service or your domain should be quite good as well in terms of reputation should be good. It should not be marked as being spammy, and SCS will help you in telling that, hey, if you're sending an email in bulk, that hey, that might be marked as a spam because you're sending it the content which is written that based on that content as well. So SCS has a lot of other features as well like that to protect the sender's reputation by sending the analytics measure on the impact of that each email that you're sending. So that SCS. So here's an example. I can use different ways to send that email. Simple, either I'm running a PHP application and I need to send an email through SMTP daemon. I can integrate with Amazon SCS, or I have some libraries or application like .NET or Java application that needs to send an email, or a software development kit, or through the console itself. So it will then send it emails to the system. Then finally, it's a simple workflow queue, which is helps developers. It's mainly workflow, and most of these services that you see are mainly for developer target for your use in your application. So simple workflow service helps developers to build, run, and scale background jobs that have parallel or sequential steps. So if you're building an application that needs to be that have multiple steps, and you want these multiple steps to be done either serially or parallelly, you want to make sure that all these workflows are being tracked. So simple workflow service is basically a fully managed set of tasks you can run in the background and then coordinate and making sure that each steps either complete successfully or being notified in case of problem. So it helps if your application is having more than 500 milliseconds to complete, make sure that the task is being tracked properly. So that's what simple workflow will help. It also helps if you have your application have a requirement to recover or retry if a task failed. In that case, you'll have simple workflow. So an example of use case, you're doing order fulfillment right from start till end. So your customer says or places an order, it verifies that order is correct, it charges the process charges credit card, then ship that order or check the inventory. Based on that, if inventory is correct, then charge the credit card and then prepare that order and ship it, and then record the completion. All these are different workflow basically, and you make sure that these workflows either one after another. In this is an example of serial workflow, which means sequential workflow, which means a task will be completed one after another. When the credit card is being charged, then only you ship the order and so on. Or you can have some task or workflow which multiple process can run or start in parallel. So that's simple workflow. So these are some of the application services which are SNS, SCS, SQS, and simple workflow service. Now, if you want to go into here, you can just search for SCS, simple email service, or simple workflow service, or simple queue service. I can go and click on simple queue service, and you can go and create these services from the console, and you can play with that if you need any queue service. So I'm here starting a queue, and then you can use that queue in your application. Depending type of, this is first in first out. This is a standard one delivery or once delivery or best effort delivery, and depending on what your requirement are, you can do the queues as well. So that's about application services. Now we're going to look at DevOps tools. Now this lesson is primarily focused if you are either working on DevOps, which is like development plus operations, but even if you're not, it'll come handy because we're going to keep it high level on this. So the development tool or DevOps is nothing but a different teams, like both development team as well as operations team working together as a single team. That's DevOps, and that spans across entire development plus operations and management life cycle. So when you configure anything, you have plan, You have to plan the application software that you're developing. Then developers will code it, and then they will, or someone will build, either developer or someone will build, and that process is called as CI, continuous integration. Then testers will test it, and then it will be released on a server which is already built by ops guys. So that release process and then deploy process, creating a release and deploying on the servers, is called as continuous delivery. So there is a CI and CD, and then operators will operate or work on that CI/CD or that entire system, or manage that system. The whole process is called as the DevOps, and the code and build part is continuous integration, including some part of testing and some part of planning. Whereas continuous delivery is basically testing, deployment, release, and then operations. This whole process is called as continuous deployment, as name suggests. And depending on the industry in which you're working, there are some tools which will be used, like Git, which you see here, is for code repository. This is where your developers will develop and store their code. Something similar in AWS is called as AWS Code Commit, where you store something similar to exactly like Git. You can use Code Commit, which is on AWS Cloud. Then you have Jenkins or Travis for continuous integration, continuous delivery. That is where you have you can use AWS Code Pipeline. We'll see that in a minute. Or you can build your service using Chef or Terraform. We looked at when we were looking configuration management, and something similar in AWS Cloud for deployment. You have, or configuration management, you can have CloudFormation. And then for delivery, you have other applications as well, like OpsWork and CloudFormation, or AWS Config, and for CloudWatch for monitoring, and AWS CloudTrail for auditing the events or auditing the AWS. So that whole process is CI/CD DevOps tools. So let's begin with first tool which developer will use is Code Commit. And Code Commit is something similar to your Git, which is a, or SVN, which is a versioning system, or your code versioning system. You have Code Commit, which is a fully managed source control for which host a secure Git-based repository. It's on the lines of Git. So it's easy for team or multiple developers to work and coordinate with each other. So Code Commit eliminates the need to operate your own source control system that you're using Code Commit for that. So developers will come and they will be working on the Code Commit to restore the repository. Then you have a code build. So like you have a code being developed by developer, and someone needs to develop a artifacts out of that. An artifact could be a WAR file, which is a web archive. It could be a EAR, which is an enterprise archive. It could be a image being created so that it can run on containers. So the process of packaging your code so that it can deploy and ready to be deployed, that's done using a tool called in AWS world, it's code build, which is building the code as name suggests. So with code build, you don't need to provision, manage, and scale your own build servers. You can use code build tool to as a build server basically. So that's what it picks up. Code build can pick up or can be managed or worked through AWS Management Console or CLI SDK, or you can invoke this from a code pipeline. We'll see that pipeline, what that is in a minute. So code build. Then either a code build can pick up your source code either from Git or Code Commit, which is AWS proprietary, or S3 bucket, and then pick up the source file, and using build script within the code build will generate the code artifacts. So code commit, which is repository, using code build can then combine together and generate a deployable artifact. Then once you have generated the artifact, then you need to deploy them on the server. So code deploy is a fully managed deployment service that automates your software deployment. That deployment could be a Java-based application, .NET-based application, and an image that can run on containers and so on. So it can deploy the artifacts generated by the code build and can be deployed on various compute service that we saw earlier in compute, which could be EC2, or which is a elastic cloud compute. It could be a Fargate, which is a serverless version, Lambda, Fargate, which is a Docker and Kubernetes or serverless version of Docker and Kubernetes, that's Fargate, or you can deploy in functions, which is Lambda, or you can also deploy on your on-premise service. So that's code deploy. Now, if you see here, this code deploy, I have a staging site or staging servers on. So I'm deploying staging onto my EC2 or for staging server, or it's for my production environment. So this is in my, I'm deploying in a production deployment. Now you can automate all this using code pipeline. So what this code pipeline is, code pipeline will pick up the code from the source repository, build it, and then deploy it using code deploy. So pipeline will do all the things. It will pick up the, as a diagram you see, it will pick up the files from source code, build them, test them, and then you can also deploy them on the cycle on a server. And then once it's successful, testing is complete, you can automate and say deploy on production on that as well. So code pipeline is a fully managed continuous delivery service that helps you to automate the release pipeline for faster deployment and quick infrastructure updates. So it will automate the build, test, and deploy your phases of your delivery process of development. So these are all DevOps related tasks. So if you see, putting it all together, you have a dev environment, and this is your production environment. You have a blue-green deployment, which means right now production service is running on blue here on this environment, and your developers have developed a new version of the same application. So what they're going to do, developers will uh, update the code, and then they will say that I'm committing the code. And once they commit the code, it will go into the code repository. The build phase will build this code build, and then it will deploy. And you can say deploy in a green environment, which is now the updated version. I've updated, you're deploying it using the code deploy on this green environment. And some users will be, or most of the users will continue to testing from a blue environment. So blue and green is nothing but similar set of production, but in blue environment, my current live code is running, and in green environment is the environment on which I want to release the new updates of my system, and only 5% of the users I say test it through the green environment. And once they've tested it successfully, I can route my load balancers traffic to all the green environment, which is a new version of this. So that's the whole process of the development cycle. Now I can run my code, or I can my developed artifact, I can put them into S3 bucket or my storage bucket as well. And the whole this process, which is code commit, code build, and code deploy, I can manage it through automated pipeline, which is called as code pipeline. So this is in a nutshell about DevOps tool. Again, if you're part of my AWS DevOps Engineer Professional, we are going to go deep into these in AWS DevOps Engineer program as well. We're going to look at AWS Architecture. And so we're trying to pin everything together, what we have learned so far, especially when we are looking on AWS services. So this is the architecture which we are saying 3-tier architecture, where you have a database tier, apps tier, and a web tier. So outer dotted line represents a region in which you have deployed that application. So within a region, you have availability zone 1 and availability zone 2. So remember, in earlier one of the lessons, we looked at what is a region and availability zone. So within that, this region, I've deployed all my primary and standby within the same region. Technically, you can deploy them in a different region as well, primary and standby sites, which means the applications which are available. And if there's any problem with that entire data center, it can be picked up by another site. And that's what we are doing in availability zone 2. So this is my availability zone 1, and this is my availability zone 2, which is in the second dotted line here. Now, within availability zone 1, I have a network. So these I've defined a VPC, which is a virtual private cloud. The whole outer dotted line is a VPC. In that, I've created 3 subnets. One is my bottom, at the right bottom, you see database tier. And then second subnet is for my application, which I'm saying my application tier servers, which is my app servers. And these are in auto scaling group, meaning if the demand increase, they can automatically scan or span or create new machines as well. So I have app servers, just representing 2 here. And then I have my web application, which is my web servers. This is my things like Apache or IIS or any other web server here. So I'm running web server here. And on top of that, I'm deployed a load balancer on front. So load, and then on top of load balancer, I have a Route 53, or which is a DNS server. So my application is accessed, my user sitting here. They will come to the my to the this through Route 53 DNS, and then forward request to the load balancer. Load balancer will in turn forward it to one of these 2 web servers. That web server in turn will forward it to application server for application logic, and application logic will behind the scene will connect either to Elastic Cache, which is a we saw in-memory database or a relational database service, or you can have DynamoDB, whatever data store you want. So this is where the application will be accessible. Then for disaster recovery, what I've done is I've configured a standby site of this relational database in another availability zone. And I've configured my app server, which saying that if this RDS backend database is not available, I'll forward my request to this standby database, and we can open the standby database if required. Now, then for my backup purpose, I can store the backup of my web server, app server, as well as my relational data into the bucket, or I can store some of the data into this bucket, which is a simple storage service S3 we saw. I can also have my static data stored in buckets. So my images, GIFs, any data coming from the database, which is static, will be coming from a bucket, and then it's serving my request to through the CloudFront, which is a content delivery network, and any static data is being accessed from this through the CloudFront. So this is an overall nutshell about the core services. Then if I want, I can then integrate it with other applications, like I can monitor this instance using CloudWatch, the entire thing. If I need any email requirements or notifications, I can use email notification service or simple email service, SCS we saw. We can connect it with DynamoDB, which is a document management, or simple email service here. This is SNS, simple notification service, and this is simple email service I can integrate with this. So that's my entire application architecture or solution architecture. Now, if again, depending on what program you are watching this, we might be in Solution Architect, we go and do an entire project work on this. Similarly for DevOps, we do a separate DevOps project, which is continuous entire end-to-end CI/CD, which is entire project on DevOps through CI/CD tools. Now, again, same thing with a high availability architecture. I've already mentioned you have my front-end servers, which is my application connecting through the internet gateway to the load balancer. Load balancer is then forwarding request to my EC2, which is my Elastic Compute, which is my virtual machines, and that virtual machines behind the scene forwarding request to the database server. So this is the way you used to deploy 3-tier architecture, my web tier, app tier, and database tier. Something similar in cloud, you can do that as well. So I have availability, one set of servers in availability zone 1, another set of servers on availability zone 2, which is US East 1A and 1B. So that's about the deployment about AWS architecture. Now we are going to look at how to access your AWS services. So let's continue with and look at what are the different ways to access AWS resources. So what you see, there are 3 main ways to access your AWS resources or services. First one is through console, which is nothing but graphical user interface to access your resources. So this is the screen or the AWS console, which I said from here, and I already mentioned to you, and later in this lesson I'm going to show you how you can create an account and the lab to follow so that you can access these resources. So this is where we were discussing earlier. These are all the services, and you can go and create, manage, delete, or update your resources, and we're going to see that some of these in subsequent lessons. So one method is this AWS console. Second is command line interface. So command line interface is like whatever you're doing from the console graphical user interface, you can do it from the command, which can be installed, or command line interface that can be installed on Windows machine or Linux machine or Mac machine. Later in this or in the next module, I'm going to show you how to install these CLI and how to configure them. And the final one is SDK, which is using software development kit. So AWS provide software development kit so that you can programmatically do some operations on these AWS resources. So using SDK, you have different SDKs. Depending on the programming language of your choice, you can have Java, .NET, PHP, Ruby, Python, Go, Node.js, or C++, or many more. I'm going to show you how to create a free tier on Amazon's AWS cloud account so that you can practice. Now I'm going to use this video in our number of trainings that we use for Amazon AWS and also for Amazon's AWS Solution Architect and various other trainings or free classes that we are doing. So, and if you are attending one of our free classes, and if that class involves a hands-on lab working with us on a hands-on lab, then it's highly recommended that you create an account with us before the class so that when we work on a free class, you can perform those tasks with us. So in order to create a free account, you will need three things. First one is a phone number, and so that you get a message on that phone number to prove your identity. And second thing you need is a debit or credit card, and Amazon will charge $1 or depending on some amount, very slight small amount, and it will be returned back to your account. This is just to test that your credit card works. AWS will not deduct that money or not charge you for cloud account or cloud services unless you upgrade it to the paid version or pay-as-you-go version. And third thing you need is email address. So once you have three things, you're ready to start. So you go to aws.amazon.com/free. This is the URL you'll be going on top, and then click on this button, create a free account. And then this is where you'll be putting your email address. So I'm using our company contact address, which is contact@k21academy.com. You specify the password of your choice and then confirm password. And then you specify the account name. So I'm creating an account name is K21Academy 2020 and click on continue. Now, unfortunately, this email ID is already taken. So I'll take another ID, which is webinar@k21academy.com. And this time email ID is not in use by AWS. So I'm on the next screen. In this screen, you'll be selecting what kind of account you want, professional or personal. So if you are not doing on company behalf, you can select personal, or if you're doing it for your company, you can do it on professional. But practically, it doesn't matter much. So I'm going to use it for personal. I wanted to show you how does it look like for someone who's doing personal. Now, first is your country code. I'm based in UK, so I'm going to select UK. And you enter your details. So I'm going to give my company details. Make sure you select this checkbox and click on create account and continue. Now on this next screen on payment information, you can enter your credit or debit card and then expiration date and your name, and make sure that your billing address matches on the billing address for your credit or debit card, and then click on verify and add. So I'm going to pause this recording now, and I'll come back after entering my credit card details and then verifying this credit card. So once your credit card numbers or details are verified, you will go to the next screen where you need to enter your phone number with the country code. So I've already entered my number, and you will have a security check, and enter your security check, whatever digits or numbers you see, and click on send a SMS. So I've clicked on send an SMS, and now you should see a message on your phone and you need to enter. So I've just got a ping. That's a message on my phone number. So I enter the key code, that a 4-digit code. I got it. Click on verify code. And once the code is verified, you'll get a identity has been verified successfully. Click continue. And now this is where you will get or select a plan, whether you want a basic plan, which is a free, or a developer plan or a business plan. So make sure you select a free if you don't want to be charged. So select a basic plan, which is free. And that should be enough for you to practice, whether you're attending any of our paid program or you're part of any free training where we ask you to create this account so that we can do some work with us in the free class. So click on free. And now this creates your account. So now you're on a screen where it says welcome to Amazon Web Services. And if you want to specify your role or personalize it, you can say what exactly your role is. So my role is, for example, depending on what your role is, I might say application architect or system administrator or IT administrator. So let me give my role as ideally I'm an enterprise architect. I don't see that, so I pick up either system administrator or application architect. Let me pick this. And then interest area is whatever your interest area is, whether it's AI, machine learning, big data analytics, probably maybe a administrator, which is enterprise application or a content delivery. Most probably you'll be on either one of these, depending on what you want to do. Or maybe I'll select a DevOps, for example, and then click on submit. And then in order for you to log in, you click on sign into the console. When your account is being created, you should receive an email as well to confirm that you've been signed in, and it says sign up confirmation, and you say that AWS, you'll get a message like AWS account is ready and you can start working on your account. So now I'm on a login page here. Like for me, because I've created a super user, so super user, the user I created is a root user, and I can create some sub users and I'll give them an access, and at that time I'll be using IAM user. Because it's my first or a root user, I'll select a root user, and I'll now give the ID which I gave, which is webinar@k21academy.com. Click next, and it'll ask you the password, and you are in console. So AWS console. So this is your AWS console, and this is where you can access all the services like virtual machine, web apps, storage, databases, network, or IoT, DevOps, anything that you want to do, or machine learning, you can do it from here. So that completes your task of creating an account in AWS. It's quite simple, straightforward. So just to recap, you need three things. You need an email address, phone number, and a credit or debit card. And it should not take more than 5 minutes to create an account. And then you're ready to do your first task. We are going to look at the hands-on lab. And in this lab, we are going to look at how to configure CloudWatch so that it creates a billing alarm, so that if for some reason if your billing hits more than $10, you get an email notification. Now this $10 is just a random number we picked. You want to reduce it to $5, that's fine. If you want to increase it to more than $10, that's also fine. We'll show it to you at that time. Now, also this will later part of this lesson we'll talk about service limits. What are the limits as a part of free account that you get? Because even though AWS says that it's a free account, not everything is 100% free, meaning that you have a specific services and a specific shape and size that are free. For example, when you create a VM, a particular size of VM, like how much memory and CPU have configured, that particular VM is free. Also, it's free for number of hours. For example, I'm just giving a random number. Maybe you're free for 75 hours per month. So if you go more than that, you might be charged, and that's why we want you to be careful with the billing. Later, I'll show you as well where to see billing as well. But if let's suppose you don't have to look continuously into the billing, you want to be notified via the email when you go and when your billing hits a particular amount, which is $10 in this case, which should not happen in my view. But just to be careful. And at end of each lab, we will recommend you to shut down the service if it charges or if there's any cost associated with this. Now for billing alarm or for sending in emails, you have so much quota that you won't be charged for these. So you don't need to stop this billing service on at all. But specifically when you do virtual machines or when you do the databases, if you're doing database, depending on which training you're watching this, you might be doing these services, and especially Docker and Kubernetes or virtual machines or databases. These are the services you need to shut down or stop them or terminate them. Usually shut it down should be enough, but in Kubernetes we'll terminate them because Kubernetes stopping is a different process. But we'll come to that point a little bit later when we go on those. Just wanted to highlight to you that why we are doing this activity guide. Now in this case, we are going to use CloudWatch, a service. Now if you've watched module 1, we discussed a high level overview about CloudWatch, which is an application monitoring. So it will monitor the application and your servers, maybe the like how much CPU uses or memory, all those things. We can also use the same service, or we'll be using the same service for billing as well. So if you're listening this in AWS DevOps, later part will go about in detail about CloudWatch, SNS, which is a simple notification service, and topics. This is using pub/sub model, which we'll cover that a little bit later in the respective training modules. So nothing to worry about, that's coming. But just to give you an index or what we are going to cover. So first, I'll give you an introduction. Then we'll look at the documentation link that we used or related links if you want to go deep into these topics. Then we'll look at prerequisite in order to complete this lab. So prerequisite is just one lab that you should already have either a free account or a trial account. And if you've not created a free account, I highly recommend you to follow one of the previous lessons which will have a video as well as step-by-step activity guide for you to create the free account if you don't have a free account. Then we'll show how to create a bill alarm so that you get notified over the email. Next, we'll talk about next two, chapter 5 and 6 are more for information purpose, that what are type of different free services and what are the limits on these free tier or free account that you get. Now, these free limits might change, so it's always good to recap or go to the respective documentation on just we can Google on AWS free tier and you give the limit of the service that you want, like storage, compute, networking. Networking is usually free. It's only we'll come to that point in when we talk about, and then uses hourly uses in Amazon free tier. What are these means? So let's begin first. Introduction. As I said, we are going to use CloudWatch to create a this billing alarm. And CloudWatch is a service you also use for monitoring your applications. So apart from monitoring, it can also use to alert for billing charges, or it basically monitor all your configuration, monitor your application, collect logs, and you can do or you can configure any additional steps. If you want further, you can, if you want, you can read it or you can skip it. This is what we're going to cover in the activity guide, as I said earlier. These are the documentation link. If you want to go a little bit deep into these, you can go and link, and it will be useful for if you want to go further. My suggestion to you would be first complete entire training program, do all the labs, and go through the certification quiz questions at end of each, or wherever there's a related to certification. Maybe we'll start from module, the actual course start. This is to prepping you up and setting you up. But later in modules, you will see exam questions. So go through these exam questions. And once you have done all the labs, once you've done the exam questions, then you can come back onto these documentation link and pick them. So prerequisite, you should already have a free account. I already have a free account, and if not, pause this, go and create a free account first using one of the previous lessons. So once you have done, first we are going to do the billing alarm. And so we will be logging into the AWS console, and billing alarm can only be set, or bills are only available in region US East, North Virginia. So even if when you create an account, you automatically get access to all the regions. You just need to go to the right hand side and select it. We covered it in one of the previous modules on what is a region and what is availability zone. If you have not gone through, or if you forgot, maybe worth going back to what is region and how do you select a region. I'm going to show you it here as well. So we're first going to go to the region North Virginia, and then we'll go to and search for under services. We will search for CloudWatch, or you can go to this here in search bar and click on CloudWatch. So that's what you need to do, and then we'll go to billing, and then we'll create alarm. So make sure you select create alarm from here and not from here. This right hand side top right is not is one for a generic alarm. We want a billing alarm, and billing alarm will be from here. So let me first go and show it to you on console so far. So I'm on this console. Right now I've selected Ohio, which is in US East, but Ohio, US East, Ohio. I need to go to US East 1, which is in North Virginia. So billing, if I don't go, I'll explain you can change this later as well. So first here, I'm going to go onto, or maybe let's select here, or you can do it later as well. So I'm selecting here North Virginia, and then you go here and say CloudWatch. Just type CloudWatch. This is say monitor resources and applications. Click on this blue text here. When you click, it will take you to the billing or CloudWatch. Now make sure that you have North Virginia here. If not, you drop down and click on North Virginia here. Then on right hand side, left hand side under alarms, we need to go to billing here. Click on this billing. And now, as I said, don't click on this. No, you come here under create alarm and click create alarm from here. So you click on create alarm and you are now on alarm. Now alarm is done based on a matrix, and in this case matrix is on estimated charge, name of like how much is my estimated charge, and currency in US dollar. If you want to change a currency of your choice, usually US dollar is good enough, and we are going to put it a static maximum, and it says if period. So if my period goes more than 6 hours, within 6 hours, if it's charging $10, I need to be notified. Or if you want to change it, you can change it and say if in a day it charges more than $10, or if in a month it charges for a, so accordingly you can pick a day or you can pick whatever time. If something is charging more than $10 in 6 hours, that means something is not right. Oh, there are, when I say service, not right for the free service. Though there are some services, if you pick up, for example, a big machine, it might consume all your machine or all your a lot of money. So that's why we are setting these alarms. So say if in 6 hours, if a US dollar, and I want to look at the condition which is static, which is greater than, and say how much dollars. So I'm going to put you $10 here. So if anything goes, if I spend more than six or $10 in 6 hours, then I need to get an alarm. So let's look at the guide. That's what we're seeing. We are covering here. We've already showed you, and then click on a threshold value as $10. So we selected this and we click on next button. Once we get next button, I'm going to explain you. This is also given in guide. Now what happens is sometimes screens change, and AWS is quite peculiar in terms of every month or so they keep changing the screen. So if anything changes in the screen, you don't need to worry about, just follow the activity guide should have been updated, and also drop an email to or put in a WhatsApp group, and also drop an email to support so that I can re-record this video. So $10, click on next here. Now this process which is selecting, you might be confused what is SNS topic. For now, if you're part of our DevOps training, we are going to go deep into this simple notification service. And also we briefly touched base when we were looking in the previous module about application services. So we looked at email, simple notification service. We also looked at simple email service, all those things. So this is using a pub subscribe model, publisher and subscriber. So CloudWatch is going to publish a message saying that, hey, your message to a topic, and that topic will be, in my case, my email will, or another service will subscribe to this topic and send this notification. So that's what is happening. I'm creating a new topic, and new topic is by default CloudWatch alarm topic. You can change it to any name. We'll leave it to default. And now email endpoint that will receive this notification. So I'm going to select my email address. Now, probably I'll send it to support at K21Academy.com. Don't send it to our support at K21Academy.com. This is where you will be changing it to your email address, and click on create topic. Now, when I do that, you are going to get a email on your email ID. So if you don't have any email account, make sure you go and email account, change it or pick up the email address of your choice. Okay, so make sure you go to the email address first. So if you look at the documentation, we have created a topic, and I've added my email address here and say click create topic. When you send a topic, you will get an email address like this, which is where you have to confirm. This is the screenshot of email that I've received in my support email address. So you'll get an email from no reply at SNS, simple notification service .amazonaws.com. And then you click on this button here, which is this one, confirm subscription. When you click on confirm subscription, you will get a message like you have subscribed, subscription confirmed. Once you do that, you click on the next topic here. Scroll down, and at the bottom there is a next. Click on this. So we've clicked on next here. Now next is I need to specify the alarm name and description. So alarm name of your choice, and say billing alarm. And then I need to look at get emails when bill exceeds $10, or whatever description you want to see. Get an email when amount exceeds 10 USD in 6 hours. you can change that window I showed you earlier, whatever window you want to click. Then click on next. Scroll down at the bottom, verify all. We are saying that it's a billing alarm where US dollar for 6 hours. If my amount goes greater than $10, then send an email to this or send an alarm notification to this topic. And this topic will have the definition saying that send an email to so and so. And I'd say click create alarm. Let's look at the documentation. Now create an alarm and you will get a message that you've successfully created an alarm. So right now it's saying we get a message like successfully created an alarm. You can close this here, and if you have not subscribed to email, it says some subscriptions are pending confirmation. Amazon SNS does not send message to an endpoint until the subscription is confirmed, which means I've not clicked the button on my confirmation message on my support email address, and that's why I'm getting this message about saying that it's not confirmed yet. I hope that makes sense. Now right now it's insufficient data. Maybe by tomorrow I should get, or maybe next 6 months or so, I'll be getting confirmation. If you say pending confirmation, that means that simply shows that, hey, I've not clicked on my email address yet on that. But if you have clicked on, you should be getting a message like something like here and say one action. So if I make it a slightly bigger, you should be seeing actions and you should say successfully created a bill alarm, and one is action one, and it will take some time to fill the data. So that's about this successfully created. Um, if you've come so far, that means you've successfully created the alarm. Now make sure you go and do it, and once you complete this lab, inform in WhatsApp group as well. Now within free service, let's look, and this is more for information from now. It's next, this entire lesson, this will be more for information purpose. So what you need to do, you need to, there are three type of free services. One is 12-month free, which means for 12 months, most of the services will be free if you on a specific shape and size, which will see specific shape and size. After 12 months, it will be pay as you go service rate. Now, some services are always free out of this, which you'll not be charged for even after whether you're an existing customer or new customer. So these are always free. And there are trials, which are short-term free trials, and that has a specific start date and end date. And after that, you go pay-as-you-go model. Now, further within free tier, there's limits. For example, RDS, which is a relational data services, it consists of compute and storage. So you get in RDS 750 hours of RDS in single availability zone, which is of this size, which is db.t2.micro. That is free. Out of which, on that you can store up to 20 gig of data, and for general purpose SSD, solid state disk or magnetic disk. What is the storage? We'll come in look into storage module if you're part of Solution Architect. But this is just to give you an idea. Now we are more interested on so this is for database limits if you're looking at data. Similarly, this is for analytics if you're doing analytics like as your data pipeline. So if in AWS, you get 3 low frequency preconditions and 5 low frequency activities. What are these? Like when you're doing as your data pipeline. What I'm interested in is compute is quite common. So you get 750 hours per month free as part of this training. As part of this free tier, and shape is T2 micro. Again, apart from that, some storage with this storage, we'll talk about this storage as well, how much free storage you get. So on an average, I think out of which 750 hours is like how many, 20 days or so, which is quite a lot of money. Oh, sorry, a lot of time. So it's totally okay. And then similarly, storage, you get 30 GB of storage EBS on SS solid state disk. So this is what is the free account. And then your uses, read about this hourly uses on Amazon Web Services free service. What does hourly means? So how does that hourly calculation happens, or how does that time calculation happens? Now the reason why I'm not telling you is these things keeps changing. So it's worth go to AWS documentation and look at what is latest one information on that. And again, this is more if you're looking at billing or pricing point of view. So just to do a quick recap, what you need to do is you're creating a billing alarm so that worth $10. So if your account gets more than, if you're being charged more than $10 in 6 hours, then it should send an email notification to you. We're going to look at how to install a Windows machine on Amazon AWS first, and then later on that Windows machine, we are going to install some command line tools like AWS CLI, which is a AWS command line interface tool. Then we'll install kubectl, which is a Kubernetes client, and then EKSCTL, which is a Elastic Kubernetes service, which is a Kubernetes or managed Kubernetes on AWS client tool. So this machine, you can use it independently for a Windows machine. For we might use this same video on a couple of other trainings. If you want to create a normal Windows machine, or you want to install maybe for your AWS DevOps tools that you want to install so that you can connect remotely onto AWS services, or you want to do other administration tasks remotely from your laptop is restricted, you have some limitations. So for all those reasons, we are going to use this machine. First, we are going to create a machine of type Windows on AWS Cloud, and then we'll install all these tools. So that's the purpose of our video. So first, straight away, I'll go onto the AWS console and create the machine. So this is my AWS management console look like when you've logged in. If you have not created an account, we have a separate video, so make sure you watch that video and create a AWS account and you're successfully logged on. I'll be starting from that point. Now, once you have successfully logged on, you click on under services, and because we are going to create a machine that comes under EC2, which is Elastic Compute Cloud or Elastic Cloud Compute, which means compute, which is nothing but a Windows or Linux machine that's running on cloud or AWS cloud. So this is what I'm going to select here and click on this EC2. And this is where I see all my servers or instances that are running. It will be listed here. There's no running instance, and instance which are all state, which means that they are running or down or deleted, all those state of that. So each instance, when I say instance, is a Windows or Linux machine, whether it's up, down, terminated, all those are listed here. Now I want to create a instance first, so I'll be clicking on launch instance. Now this video is going to be for Windows, but if you prefer, we have a separate similar video but for Linux machine, and if you want to do on all the tasks on Linux as a client, you can look at that video. But for now, I'm creating a machine of type Windows, so I'm going to click here and say launch instance and click on launch instance. So this is what I want to launch this instance or create an instance. Now this is where you will select what kind of a operating system you want. You can use Amazon Linux or Linux that's done by Amazon, Red Hat Linux, SUSE Linux, or Ubuntu, or Windows. So if you want Linux, you select which version of Linux you want. The other one which we have done is Amazon Linux image, or you can use Ubuntu. In my case, I want Windows, so I'm selecting Windows Server 2019 base, and I'll select, click on here. It's a 64-bit. I'll select. Now, because I want to keep my cost minimal, AWS gives you a 1 year free account, and that 1 year free account will be used. So you get some free services as part of that, but as long as they have a particular shape or for a limited time. So I'm eligible, this machine, this shape, which is T2 micro, is eligible for free 1 year, but you have some free hours in a month. And that basically is one vCPU with 1 gig of memory, and elastic block storage is the storage that you get as part of this machine. Now I can simply click review and launch, but I want to look at what all configurations I get. So I'll click on configure instance details here. Now this is where number of instances, which means I just want one machine. I'll not discuss much. I'll only focus on important thing, which is network, which means it's basically creating into the default network, and network will have subnets, and the machine will get placed in that subnet, so that machine will get IP address from the range of IP within that subnet. It'll automatically assign a public IP. I want the public IP to be use the public IP because I want to be ability to connect to this machine remotely from over the internet. So we'll select public IP and leave all the options default. Click on next, add storage. Now this is where when you create a Windows machine, you see a C drive, And then on top of that, you need some additional disk, like for example, D drive or E or F or G or XYZ drive, so that you can store some data on that. So I'm creating a storage, which is 30 gig size, solid state disk, and with IOPS 100 by 3000 IOPS. And then I'm selecting a tick box which saying if I delete this instance, the storage associated with this I'm creating here should also be deleted on terminating the instance. Terminating means completely removing this instance. So leave it to default, click on add tags, and tags will be basically primarily for adding a metadata to the instance. So for example, I can say, is it a dev environment, test environment, for which team it is. So for now, it's a trial thing. So we'll skip the tags and click on security group. Now security group will basically saying it's kind of a firewall, allow the connection, what all port numbers are allowed. Now since it's a Windows machine, and Windows we connect using RDP, which is remote desktop protocol, and that RDP protocol or my Windows service of RDP listens on port number 3389. So I'm saying allow 3389 on the port range 0.0.0.0/0, which means everywhere. So over the internet, or allow every client or any client can connect it to the port number 3389 on this machine. So I'm opening that. Later, suppose on this machine you install a web server with port number 80 or secure web server port number 443, then you can come here and add a rule later. We can do that later as well. For now, I just want RDP 3389 and then say click review and launch. So now here I'm saying it's validating me the steps and say launch or step this, which is saying it's a T2 micro, it's a EBS only. And then here I'm allowing port number 3389 and it's a public IP. I'm assigning a public IP, it's available on the internet. And these are all instance related details here. If you see here, assign public IP, I'm saying use subnet setting and it's enabled, which means public IP is enabled. I'm also using IPv6, so I'll be getting an IPv6 as well. And storage, I've attached a 30 gig disk storage, solid state disk with this. And click on launch. Now, in order for me, I need a user ID and password to connect. And because since a Windows machine, I need an administrator password. Now, administrator password, I'll get it once I have a something called as public private key. So what's going to happen in Windows is that if it's a Linux machine, I would have created or connected using a private key. Now in Windows, I'm going to get this, I'll create a public private key pair. I'll save it. And in order to get my administrator password, I'll be using this key pair to get a administrator password. So it's kind of a key to my administrator password, and you'll understand that in a minute. So I'll say key pair. I'm going to say create a new key pair, and I'm saying AWS Windows K21 Academy. So this is my key pair name, and I'm downloading this. I'll save it for future because I'll need it later. So it's creating a PM file. I'm saving it under downloads and save it. And I'll use this, or I'll need this key pair when I need to extract or get my administrator password. So I'll click on launch instance. Now, if I want how to connect to this machine, if you need that step, you can right click here and get it how to connect to this Windows instance. I'll share anyway, or I'll show it to you how you can get hold of this password or administrator password, and I'll show you how do you connect to this machine as well. So now we have asked it to launch or create an instance. So we'll say view instance. And now if you see, these two were previously, now it's running. My instance is up and accessible now. The public IP for this instance is 3-.15.192.2. So this is the public IP, and this is where I'll be connecting. Now I can connect in two ways. I simply go to instance, and now if I unselect, the connect button is great. So whatever machine I want to connect, you select that and click on connect here. That's one way. Or I go to that machine, click here, and then you can click here, connect as well, one of these two methods. Now I need the public IP. So I can say networking, and this is the public IP of this machine. I can connect to this, or I can copy this URL or this DNS machine name. So public name of this machine or IP, I can connect with either of these two. So I'll go and say connect. Now there are two ways to connect. One is session manager, and for that session manager, there is some prerequisite required in order to set up on this machine. Another method is RDP client, which is a remote desktop tool or protocol to connect to this machine. And usually if you're connecting from Windows machine, you typically will have that already the tool. So if you go to if you're connecting from Windows or Mac, you might need a remote desktop connection tool, RDC, remote desktop connection, to connect to this machine, which is RDC. Or you can download the remote desktop file to download, or it's a tool utility if you don't have, but by default it comes in Windows. This is going to be my IP address or the name. So I'll be copying this name from here and I'll paste it here. Now, my username is going to be administrator, but I also need the password for this. So how do I get hold of this password? I click on say get password. And now here, I need to specify the key or public private key pair that I generated earlier in one of the previous point when we were creating the instance. So I saved it. I need to give that key pair in order to retrieve my administrator password. So I'll click on browse. And then this is the PM file, aws-windows-k21academy.pem. I select this and say decrypt password. So in exchange of this key value pair, I need my password. So now this is my password, which I'm going to save it. Now, no need to remember this. I'm going to delete this instance after doing this work. So this machine may not even work. So no need to remember, or don't worry if you think I've shared this password. I'm going to delete this machine after this work is done or this demo is done. So now, in order to connect to this machine, I go back. I have the public DNS copied here. Click on connect. Give it few minutes. And if this DNS might take a few minutes to reflect. Now, if I say no, click OK, and then type one more time. Because first time it might be the cache data. You may not have DNS propagated properly. So I'm not getting this machine. So let me copy one more time. And if it doesn't work, I might go and get a IP address. So it could be my DNS setting not propagated properly. So 192.20-2. So click on connect. Now it's connecting. So you might have to try a few times for this DNS to be flushed properly. Now, if you see, it's saying user ID is 447 or whatever number this number is. So I'll change that and I'll say more choices. And I want to connect it as a user called administrator. So I'll say use a different account. And now I'm typing the username as administrator here. So I'll paste username as administrator, and my password is I can copy from here this password copied, and then I'll paste it here. If you want this to be remembered, you click on remember, or if you want to see this password is same as ending with WVX. And now you say click OK. And so first time you get a warning saying that the certificate which validate the authenticity of this remote desktop machine is not correct because it's a dummy certificate. So if you look at this view certificate, these are issued by and issued to, which means issuer of this certificate to this RDP and issued by and issued to are the same person. It's a self-signed certificate in a nutshell. You are okay with that. You select. We know that we have just created this machine. So click on, do you want to connect to this machine with certificate error? Click on yes and say yes. And now you'll be able to log into this machine here. So if I see, I can do the command prompt, I can open the internet browser, I can do whatever I was able to do earlier or in any other machine. It's like exactly what a machine. So now you have a machine that can act as a client, or any Windows machine you need of a smaller size. It's a 1 gig memory only. So you have limited things, but at least you get a machine free, and where on this machine you can do the task that you want to do. Now in the next video, I'm going to install AWS CLI on this machine, and I also use kubectl and ekctl, which is the command line utility to manage Kubernetes, because I'm going to use this machine for my Kubernetes management or creating a Kubernetes cluster on AWS. If you want to use this machine for other purpose, by all means do it. If you're part of our AWS DevOps training or AWS Solution Architect training, you can use that to play or act as a client to all other activities as well. Now, once you work is done, one thing you need to make sure is that you need to make sure that once work is done, you select this here, go to instance, and then stop the instance, because the number of time or number of hours it's going to run, it'll eat up that money from your free credit that you get every month or for next 1 year from AWS. So as long as you're working fine, but once work is done, you come here and say stop instance and say stop. And later, once you need to work again on this machine, you select here and then say start. So we'll say instance and say start instance, and you can start instance. The public IP will change. So make sure this public IP might change. So remember that value, and you might connect to this public IP or the name. Look at the name as well, DNS name. If it changed, use that new name which you need to work. Next time I'm going to install AWS CLI. That time I'll come back again to this machine and I'll start this machine, get the new IP, a new name, DNS if name changes, and then we'll connect and do the work. So with that, now go and create this machine of type Windows. If you prefer Windows as a client to do all your administrative work on AWS, which is AWS CLI, any other tools which we use for AWS DevOps training, or if you're doing Kubernetes training with us, maybe for Kubernetes or any other training that you're doing, or you just want to play that as a test machine, go and do and try it out. Then we are going to look at how to reset password of Windows machine that you've created on AWS. Now I already have a Windows machine being created and running, and this is what we created in one of the modules in previous module 2, where we created a Windows machine. And since then, I got a lot of requests about how do I reset the password or how do I connect. We already showed you, but how do I reset this password that is comes default out of the box? So I'll show you that as well on how do you reset that password for. So this is what I'm going to cover in this lab. So if you notice here, I've already this machine is up and running, and if this machine is not running, or let's suppose if you have shut it down, you can click here and then start. You can say start instance. Because instance is already running, this machine is already running, I can click on this machine, and first thing is I need to get a public IP of this machine. So I'll make a note of this. So I'll open a notepad and I'll use this public IP to connect. Second thing is I need the password for this user. By default, when you create a Windows machine, it creates a user called administrator, and you create a password which is generated. So for that, you'll be clicking on connect, and then you're coming here and click on RDP client. And first time, as I said, we showed you earlier as well, you need to retrieve the password. So you'll be clicking on get password. And here, this is the key pair that you created when you created this instance, and we downloaded that PEM file. So we'll be providing this PEM file to retrieve my password, original password back. So we'll click browse here, and then I think it was Windows. So I'll just search for AWS Windows. So it's AWS-Windows. This is what I saved it as. So AWS-Windows, a dash key pair. This is the PEM file that I created. Oh, sorry, I can cancel there. So here AWS dash, why it's selecting this, cancel, and file name is AWS dash, this is what I should be selecting, Windows key pair. So I'll be selecting this file and click on open, and it is copied this RSA private key, this PEM file, and click on decrypt password. And now I got this password, original password that was set by AWS for me. And so why I'm changing this password why I'm changing this is because I don't want anyone to, or I want to remember this password of my choice, because it's complex and I can forget this, and I don't want to come here again every time copy it. So once you got the original password, then you go and open the remote desktop. And if you're doing it from the Mac machine, and if you have a Mac machine, what you need to do is you just search for remote desktop client for Mac and download this Microsoft Remote Desktop app for Mac, and then you install that, and then you go to like remote desktop. This is available out of the box on Windows. So for Windows, you don't need to do anything. From your laptop, Windows laptop, you simply say remote desktop client or connection. That comes out of the box, this utility. For Mac only, you need to download this app. Now, this is where you'll be entering the password, sorry, not password, the IP address of this machine, which is 3.16.107.211. And from here, then under credentials, username, you'll be expanding this and you'll be saying administrator, user as administrator, and click on connect. And now if you make sure that you have a user ID as administrator, and first time when you're logging in, you'll be entering that password that we created. So I hope this was a password ending with LEF. I'll double check it one more time. Connect, RDP client, get password, browse. I said EC2 or AWS-Windows. Keep here, open, and say decrypt password. And it was LEF. Yeah, that was the password. I think this is the password. Yeah, this is the password. I'll copy and log in from here and click OK. And you say you trust this certificate. It's a self-signed certificate. We'll trust this certificate. Click on yes. And then I'm logged into my Windows. So I've logged in as my Windows for using my existing password. Now I'll type here and say control panel. So I'll be opening the control panel. And under control panel, you will have a user account. Under user account, click on change account type. And here you change and say local administrator local account. Click on this. And now you get a manage or change users administrator account. You click on change password. And this is where you'll be entering the password, original password. And then now you change, I'm changing this to welcome one with capital W and confirm my password with capital W. You can choose any name of your choice. If you want, you can put a password hint as well and click on change password. And now my password is changed. So if I log off now here and we'll say that disconnect. And now if I try logging in again from my remote desktop and then log in with this IP address, click on connect. Make sure you have a user ID and administrator. Now this time, and from here onwards, now you'll be using my new password, which is welcome one with capital W. Click OK and click accept on this warning. Yes. And now you're in. So that is how you change the password of your Windows machine on EC2 running on AWS Cloud. We are going to look at how to install a web server of type IIS, which is a Microsoft Internet Server, web server, and on a EC2, which is a Elastic Cloud Compute or Elastic Compute Cloud, which is nothing but a virtual machine on AWS Cloud, and then access this web server that we have installed on top of that. Now, this is the diagram which let me explain, and then we'll actually do the lab, and then we'll be also where you're watching this video, there'll be a guide as well on, so you can do the practice lab from using that, following that document. So this is what you see here out there. This is my AWS cloud. Inside that we have a virtual network. Now virtual network, when we go to the module 7 later, inside that module we'll having a networking module. In that we'll be talking about what is a virtual network, what are these IPs here. This is called a CIDR 16, which is nothing but a group of continuous IP addresses from where I have some set of IP addresses. So that is by default, there's a default VNet that comes on AWS cloud. When you create a region, inside that region by default there's a VNet. We are going to use that VNet, which is nothing but a network. That network is further broken down to smaller networks we call subnet. And again, so a subset of this bigger network, which is again another set of IP addresses combined together, or continuous block of IP addresses is a subnet. And the IP addresses, or if you create any resource like a database server or a virtual machine or a load balancer inside that subnet, the IP addresses on that instance, in this case EC2 or a virtual machine or a load balancer or a database, they get IP addresses from this subnet. So that's the main purpose of, or that's where these machines are, or that's how these machines get IP addresses. So in this lab, we are going to do is we are going to install, or we are going to install a IIS server on top of this EC2. Now, so far, you should have already created a EC2 environment of type Windows, and if not, maybe there's a guide prerequisite we have mentioned in the activity guide as well in the PDF. So you should be knowing how to install a Windows machine and how to connect, but I'll show you again one more time how to connect. Now, when you're accessing it over the internet, we saw that we opened a port number 3389, which is a remote desktop protocol, or RDP, and through a remote desktop client on a Windows machine or a remote desktop client on a Mac machine, you can connect from here over the internet to this EC2 instance. Again, this is what we have done already in one of the previous labs. So once you connect to this machine, then you configure something, a Microsoft IIS. This is what we're going to see here. And then once this Microsoft IIS is installed, we are going to deploy a web page or create a web page on this Microsoft IIS server. And then we are going to access it from over the internet from your laptop. But in order to access this IIS listens on a port number 80. So we'll be opening up a port 80 in a security group or network security group or a firewall, so that port 80 can be accessible from the internet. And that's the whole point of this lab we are going to do. Now, again, if you're not familiar with VPC, so this VNet is a concept on Azure, which is a virtual network. In AWS, you have a VPC. So you'll be creating a VPC. Inside that, you'll be creating a subnet. Now, you don't create it now. It's already there. In the module 7, we talk about networking. This is where we'll go deep and create all those things separately or from scratch. But for this lab, we are going to reuse the existing virtual network and subnets. So let me directly go on to the AWS console, and where I have already created a EC2 instance, and then I'm going to connect to that and install IIS server for you. So I'm in AWS console. I've already logged into this console. So I'll search for and say EC2, and you should have already created a Windows machine. And if not, maybe create one more time. Follow the process that already done. We already did this one of the previous labs where we installed a Windows server. So Windows server is running. And if you look at under security, the security is the port number 3389 is already open from the internet. That we all did in past. Now, how I'm going to connect to this is I'm going to pick up the public IP, copy this, and from here I'll say remote desktop client or connection. And from here I'll type the port number, or sorry, this IP address, which is I should be using public IP. Again, we covered this in past. And then from here, show more options. You probably will be using a user called administrator. And then click on connect. You will need a password to connect to this machine. Now, password we saw earlier, you can retrieve this password by clicking here, connect, and then RDP client, and then you say get password. You browse the key that we selected earlier. In this case, I've used AWS North Virginia key. So I'll just say AWS-N Virginia. And then this is my key pair PEM file. So I need my PEM file, and click on open and say decrypt password. And this is the password. I got it from here. So I'll be entering this password here and click on OK. Ignore this warning and click on yes. And now you are logging into the remote desktop. We have opened it parallelly here on, so just you can understand this here. And now we are ready to install IIS server on this. So you go to this start menu, and the machine that you created should have been a Windows server machine. And that's when you will get the server management tools and everything. So from this start menu, you're going to go to the server manager, and this will open up the server management tool for me. You can, if you get this pop-up, you say try managing server with Windows Admin Center. We'll say close. And this is where I have configured this server, local server. So this is where we'll be configuring my server. And I'm going to add a role called IIS, which is a internet server, or I think information internet server, internet information server, IIS web server on. You can Google it and can figure out the IIS, which is a web server from Microsoft. You'll say before you begin, you get some warning or message. So you click on next. And this is a step to configure a IIS server or a web server, this doesn't matter whether you're doing it on AWS Cloud or Azure Cloud or Google Cloud or on-premise, this step is same. We'll say that role-based feature installation, keep it default, and then keep it all destination server, which is this local machine, and say click next. And this is where this is important. This is where we are selecting the role. Now, whatever things you want to install on this server, you can select that. I'm only interested in IIS, so I can say and say this. Let me cancel it one more time and show it to you. This is what we're interested IIS. If you want Active Directory Domain Controller, you can do that. There might be DNS server. You see DNS server. If you want to configure DNS server on this server, on this Windows machine, you can do that as well. We are right now only interested on a web server, so we'll select this. You see that add features that are required. Now we are adding some features on this IIS, which means I also want management console so I can manage this web server. So we'll select these features, management tools, and say add feature. So now this is selected. Click on next button here. And now whatever is any features, we'll leave it to the default. Click on next, and leave it default again. A role service, what all things we are going to get this with this web server. All these features are we going to get this with web server. Leave it again to default. Click on next. And now we confirm installation and we say install. But before we install, I want to show you one more thing. You go to this your folder and go to this PC and go under C folder or C drive. By default, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 folders you see here. Now, when you install this web server, you're going to get one more folder here, which is inetpub. This is my web server. Basically, all my files being served on the internet, over the internet from this IIS, it will be from that folder. So I click on install and it'll take few minutes to install and saying it's starting the installation. So let it install and we'll go in the meantime to this here and we refresh this button here. And remember, this is I'm all doing on a Windows server running on AWS Cloud. And we refresh it here. So once this is installed, we will come back. So I'll pause it for a few minutes or 5 minutes and then I'll come back here. So if you notice now here, the installation has completed. I'm back now after a few minutes. Click on, once it's installation you see completed successfully, click on close here. And then you go and scroll down and go back to your folders. And okay, inetpub is already there. Maybe if you don't see, let me close this first. Now the job for this installation is done. So let me see if I can close this. So we'll close this one, not the top one. Top one is for your remote desktop. You close the bottom one or the under one. So it's gone now, or like basically the window is closed. We go back to here. And if you don't see, maybe refresh here and C drive or refresh from here. And you see that, hold on one second, date modified. So inetpub is created now here. This is the one which I got. You click on this inetpub, your files will be served from here. So inside inetpub, this is where your web server is. All the log file of the web server will be here. Temp file is here. History is here. I'm interested in www root, and this is where your servers will be rendered. And this is my IIS. And this is the default IIS that, or the page when I'm going to access this page, it's going to serve me from here. So now let's try to, I've installed the server. Let's try to access it and see whether we can access it or not. And let me know on here, what do you think? Do you think, just say, yes, we'll be able to access it, or no, we will not be able to access it. And if yes, why? And if not, why not? So this is my public IP. First of all, I'll again use the public IP and type here HTTP and then colon / and then IP address and hit enter. And if you see, we'll wait for this to come. I'm going to do the same thing on the server. So I'll go here and open the browser here or the internet, this file here. And you can say, ask me later. And here I'm going to type HTTP and then / control V and then hit enter. And on this page here, I got it saying the site can't be reached, and similar, and here I'm saying control maybe continue to prompt when website is blocked. So we'll uncheck this and say click on close. And here also I'm saying unable to reach to this web server. Even though my web server is installed and configured, I'm unable to reach it. Why? And so let's look at this diagram again. So we have installed this EC2, or this EC2 was already there. We installed this IIS and we are trying to access it here, but it's not available on port number 80. Why? Because I still have to open this port number from something called as network security group, which is a firewall. So again, we're going to discuss these firewall, network security group, what VPC, subnets in the module or later module in module 7 again. So what I'm going to do is I'm here on AWS here. If you see my AWS console, this is my EC2 instance, or let me take you back. This is my EC2 instance. Click here, and then under security tab, if you see there's a port number only 3389 is open for over the internet. So what I need to do is I need to edit this rule, inbound rule, and allow port number 80 as well, port number 80 from internet. So this is the security group which I'm using. This is a security group is nothing but a firewall. So I'll click on the security group, and if you see inbound, which means incoming request, is only 3389 is allowed. So I'll say edit inbound rule, and here I'll say add a rule, and I'm saying my web server rule. So I'll say HTTP here and say HTTP, and by default is 80 port number, and it's saying custom, and source is my 0.0.0.0. Now 0.0.0.0/0, which is a CIDR range 0, which we call, which means this includes every server from the internet. So any server from internet can now go and access this web server. So I'll say click on save rule. Once rule is saved, I go back to my EC2 instance, click on this instance here, and go to security, scroll down, and if you see now port number 80 is there as well. So port number 80 is allowed from the security group, which is launch visit 50. Now if I go and refresh this page here, now I see the page number IIS, and same thing I'm going to do on here as well. And let's refresh, and now I can see the page. Now this is a default page which is coming from this site, which is IIS. So what I can do is I can take a backup of this and say maybe and I want to change this as well to just to make sure that it's coming from here. So copy and then right click and then paste. So I have a copy, and now I'm going to edit this and say we'll open with a notepad. So open with and notepad, and I'll remove everything from here, and we will be writing a simple document, which simple document says something like, I'll explain this meaning as well, what this meaning is. And again, we are not doing a web server, like this is a simple web page. Again, this is not a web server training or web page training, but just to give you simple, this is called as XML tag, which saying this is a HTML page. This is starting, and this is where my HTML page ends. So this / is the ending, and without / is starting. Now here, this is my background body. So I think this is where I'm saying there's a body is background, BG color is background color, it's yellow color. And then in that I'm saying this is web server from K21Academy training H1. Again, I'm going to put this little syntax in the word in the PDF or the step-by-step hands-on activity guide, which is in PDF format available from the portal where you're watching this. You should be able to download that guide. Now, this is the page which I want, or this is the text. The color of the page will be yellow, and I'm saying close this body and then close this HTML. So it's a simple page. I'll say save, and now this is saved. Let's see whether I can access it or not. So hit refresh here, and now it's a yellow background. Say this is a web server from K21 training. So this is now you've successfully accessed this here. Now, if you want to restrict to a selective IP, and you say that you can do other thing as well. So right now we have opened it from the internet, but you can restrict and say what all source IPs can connect to this. So this is the lab that we have successfully performed. Just to do a quick recap, what you need to do, what we have done is we already had a AWS account. We already had a default VPC, virtual private cloud. Inside that we had a default subnet. Inside that we already had a Windows machine IIS EC2. On that we configured IIS and then opened port number 80 from my security group, which is nothing but firewall, and then access the page and then modified this page. Now, before you go, make sure you take a screenshot of the page that you created, this page that you created, that page, and then put it in our WhatsApp group so that it tells me two things. First is you're taking action and you've completed this. Second thing is it will inspire others who are like you inside the program. When they see someone else have done the lab, they also perform this lab. So do those two things. And once this is done, don't forget to delete this whole thing. So, or this instance, otherwise you will be charged. So select this and here instance state and say terminate. Make sure you terminate it so that your resources are freed up and you can then go back and you not run out or you not use your free trial or free hours that you get. We are going to look at how to use or install and configure AWS command line interface. And then later, if you are in DevOps team, or if you're listening this as a part of DevOps, or if you want to do something about programmatically, how do you write or use the AWS programmatically using a software development kit for Node.js, then you can follow the second part as well. So we're going to cover two things in this lab or in this activity guide. So just first, I'll give you a quick overview about what we are going to cover in this lesson. So first is, or in this guide, so first is it'll give you a little bit introduction on what we are going to expect. So first I'm going to do with respect to CLI, and then I'll go to the SDK, software development kit. So we'll look at documentation link. If you want to go a little bit deep into and see what document we have used in order to prepare this document, or if you want to go to AWS documentation for CLI, those links will be available here. And then chapter number 3 is prerequisite. What all things, as a prerequisite, you should have already created a cloud account. And then you should also have installed two machines. One is Linux machine and second is Windows machine, because we are going to install the CLI on Linux and Windows. If you prefer Windows, do it on Windows. If you prefer Linux, you can do in Linux. And if you want to do both, you can do both as well. So uh, first, we are going to do or connect to the EC2 Windows machine, because we want to install Windows. You can do it the same thing on your laptop as well, but every laptop has a different configuration. And some laptops we've noticed is in past that they have firewall issues, or they have some restrictions, or spyware create a problem, or their VPN when they connect they can't install, or the processor doesn't support the CLI. So there are a lot of issues. So instead of doing it on your laptop, you'll be doing on Windows machine that you have created earlier. So that Windows machine, we did it one of the previous lessons. So first is we are going to configure the Windows Internet Explorer so that you can download all the required files like AWS CLI, and then we'll install the CLI. First part in this, we are going to install the CLI. So first is Windows, and then on Linux, it's already installed. Amazon Linux is already installed. So we'll skip this part. And then macOS is here for information purpose only. Again, we don't support macOS. This is given for information. Use either Windows or Linux. Then once you have installed the AWS CLI, you have to configure it so that the CLI knows on which cloud account it needs to talk. And for that, we are going to create a AWS access keys so that it can interact AWS access keys. So we'll provide that access keys at the time of configuration. That's going to come into this in this part. And so let's first look at follow this a little bit down. Again, this architecture all is about SDK. So I'll cover that SDK or software development kit in the next video. If you are looking as a part of this as a solution architect and you don't want to look at the SDK, you can skip this part, SDK part, and hit directly to the AWS CLI install. This is the documentation I was talking about. We have used to prepare this guide. And then prerequisite, as I said, you should already have an AWS account and you should have already created a Windows machine on AWS. And if you're a Mac user, we recommend you to either create a virtual machine of Windows or you use Linux machine. And now what we're going to do is we are going to connect to this machine which we have created Windows machine in previous step, and then we'll start it if it's not already running, and then we'll connect through using RDP remote desktop, which we saw. And once we go there, we are going to set our Internet Explorer setting so that next time it downloads a file, it can successfully download the files on the required files. So for that, you're going to go to the Internet Explorer and go under Internet Options. Inside that, you'll go to the security tab, and inside the security tab, you will go on internet and change it to custom level. And when you change to the custom level, scroll down and you come to downloads, and instead of disable, you say enable, because you will be downloading AWS CLI in that. So enable and click OK, and then apply and then OK. And then you're good to, and then click OK, and then you're good to download the CLI on this machine. So let me go to and show it to you. How do you change that? You can follow the guide or follow the video. So if you see I'm on my AWS console, you just type EC2. Now make sure that EC2, wherever you created this EC2, make sure you're in the respective region. So if you see now here, for me, it will not show me any machine or any instances, because instance state is 0. If I go, there's no instance, and it's not showing me any instance. The reason being I'm on a different region. So I created this machine in US East 2. So make sure whatever region you selected to create machines, you go into that region specifically. Now this is my Windows machine, so this is stopped. So I'll select this machine and I'll say instance state and say start the instance. So once this machine is being started, I'll go under connect. So let's refresh it. So once this machine comes up, I'll be able to see the connect button. So if you hear, it's connect. And instead of session manager, we don't want to use session manager. We'll be using RDP client. And I've already got this machine, and I'll do MSTSC and we'll connect to this machine, say connect. And because this is, I need to connect as an administrator, user is different. So I'll say more choices, select on, say, use a different account. And I'm going to use administrator account. We already did that when we were looking into the Windows. I already changed the password to welcome1. I'll say it's showing me that the certificates on this Windows machine is self-signed. So say yes, click OK. I trust these certificates. And now I'm on a Windows machine. So let me make it full screen. This is now I'm on a Windows machine or desktop running on the AWS console. Now I'm going to work on AWS console. So I'll open the Internet Explorer, go to this settings here, configuration. Under that, you say Internet Options. And from here, you select the Security tab and you make sure you're on Internet and change it to custom level. From here, you scroll down, keep going down, and under downloads, you say that file download is disabled. You enable it, click on OK. It says warning, are you change this setting for this zone? Say yes. And then you say apply. And then you say OK. Now you'll be able to download or ready to download. This is all a job done. Then we are going to go to the documentation again. So I'm back into the documentation. And now in order to install CLI, there are three, as I said, windows. You can officially go to this documentation, or I've already updated this guide. So I need to simply copy this URL, which is MSI, which is a Microsoft installer, which is 64 Windows machine. So I'll copy from here, Control C. I go to my, not on my laptop. Again, I repeat, this is my AWS server or desktop running on AWS. So I'll go there. Maybe because I've just changed the settings, I'll go and close the screen one more time and open the Internet Explorer one more time. I go and enter this URL. Now, first time it's saying security warning, your page is not a secure connection. You make sure that you select a checkbox and say in the future, do not show this warning. Select this and click OK. And now you have AWS CLI downloaded, or it's downloading. So you say save and click on save. When you click on save, it will be saved under the download folder. So it's running the security scan. In the meantime, we'll go back and say, look at the documentation. Once it's downloaded, you say save, and once it's downloaded, we need to run, and we'll come into the next prompt. We always will be downloading the latest version, which is at the time of recording, it's version 2 of that CLI. So it says downloaded, and now click on run. So once I'm on run, next you need to do is next. So if you see, it just it's a simple installer, next, and click on install. So we'll click on next. You say I accept terms and conditions. You click on next. And then here you're installing under C program files, Amazon AWS CLI v2. Leave the default value, click on next and click on install. So this will install my AWS CLI. So you've just installed it. We'll open a command prompt and then see my AWS dash version to see it should show me AWS CLI. And if prompt off, leave it, don't worry about it. Now, if Windows is unable to find and saying that AWS is not recognized, make sure you close the Windows Explorer or this and open it one more time if you've opened it in past. So I'll say finished. I'll go into the search bar here and type CMD, which is a command prompt, and say click on this. And on this command prompt, what I'm doing is, one second. I'm saying AWS space dash version, and I'm saying that AWS CLI version 2.1.16, and it's based on Python 3.7.9 for Windows 10. It's my AMD 64 processor on AMD on this Windows, where it's Windows desktop is installed and prompt is off. So we have installed the CLI, but we have not configured it. So that means this CLI doesn't know on which account to connect. So that's where next we will create a kind of a user ID and password or key or ID and a key so that we can configure it. And we'll configure it and I'll show you how to configure. But before that, we need to get hold of access key and ID for the user. So that we'll cover later. I'll cover in the next lesson. So for Linux, because we have installed AWS Linux in the previous lesson, the CLI comes by default. You don't need to install anything. You need to configure, but configuration steps remain same whether you do configure for Windows or Mac, or Linux. So so we'll cover that later. Now, if you want to follow Mac OS, we don't support Mac OS, but you can follow the steps here and you can look at the official documentation as well. Now, once this is done, we are going to head into the next lesson where we create AWS access keys. So access keys means you need a user ID and password or key for the user through which it's going to connect. So technically, if you see, I'm connected as a root user and I can connect. Earlier, I connected as a root user and I can access or I can configure that root user. Or I can ask CLI to make a connection through the root user, but that's not a very secure way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a AWS user ID, and that user ID will be used to, or the keys associated with the user ID will be used to configure my AWS CLI. So what I need to do, I'll be going in Identity and Access Management service, which we saw briefly earlier, and I'll go to the dashboard and we are going to click on users and create a user. Now user, you can use any name here and you will be saying I want to give a programmatically access and also AWS Management Console, and we'll give them a custom password. You set a password and you click on next permission. We don't want a user to we don't want to give user a option to password reset or next login. We don't want that. We simply say permissions, and we are going to add a user to a group, and that group is basically saying administrator group, which means we are going to make this user an administrator group so that it can do administrative related tasks later from this command line interface. And we'll add that to a group called developers, and then we will create some tags, and tags are more for information purpose. You can leave it blank as well. You can leave the tag, and then you simply say review the details and create this user. Once this user is created, you will get a CSV. You will get the CSV file that will have the access key ID and secret key. And that access key ID and secret is the one which we'll be using because I need that in order to configure my CLI, so that CLI then will be configured and it will be using that user to connect. So let me go onto the console and follow these steps. Okay, so you go onto the IAM here, click on IAM, and then I'm going to users. Right now, I only have a user. There's no root user, or there is only root user. There is no additional user. So I'll click on add user and simply say, I'll say here Atul, but you can create of any of your choice. I want to give that programmatic access. I want to also give management console access. I want to say custom password, and then um, uncheck this box, which is user must create a password on the next sign in. Click on next permissions. So now I'm going to add this user to a group. So you say that create a group, and then you select a name and say, I'm saying this is a developer. So this is my developer. Usually typically in enterprise, I'm going to give them only the required access. Here, I just want to give them full access to AWS resources. So I'll select the full access. Otherwise, I'll specify for this user whatever access I want to give. So I'm saying full access and say I'm creating a group. So basically I'm creating a developers group and giving administrative right to this group and say next. Tags, I'll leave it blank. Tag is basically for identify some extra metadata to the user. Next is I'm finally reviewing it. I've created a user called Atul and I've done full access. So I'll say create user. And this will also help you um, in giving you the required access. So I can also download the CSV or I can show and make a note of these two details here. So I'll open a new notepad and maybe store the keys there. I'll first download the CSV and keys and say new user credential under downloads. And I can open this file, CSV file or Excel file. And let me expand this here. And I'll also expand this. And so I'm more interested in these two details, which is this here. I'll put it in Notepad. This is my key ID. And this is my secret access key, which I'll here key. Other option you can do is, if you don't want to save this file here, you can simply say show here. It's the same information here, which if you see in my notepad. So this is the same key, which is AKI80, this one, and this is the password, or this is the information. This is very important for me to save. So once this is done, I can close this. I've created a user is being created successfully. All I need to do is now configure my CLI. So I go back to the documentation and I've got my key and access ID and key. All I need to do is go to whether it's Linux or Windows, I can use the same. So I'll simply say AWS space configure, and it's going to prompt me what is your key ID and the key ID which I've selected, the access key as well, and then it's going to prompt me two more things like which region I'm selecting it from. So which region, and so my default region, whatever region you want by default CLI to create resources, so that in CLI if you don't specify any region, it'll go and create your resources in that region. And then it'll ask you the format as well, which is you need to provide JSON format. So I'll specify that. So go back to your Windows machine, and now here you were saying AWS. Instead of this, you'll say this time AWS configure. So I'll say AWS and space configure. Hit enter. And now it's prompting me for the key. So this is the first one, key ID. So this is the key ID on Notepad, and copy and come here and then right click and see paste. That doesn't work. 1 second. So let me try one more time. Control C and Control V. Hit enter, and similarly Control C here. Select this, Control C, and here right click. No, it didn't work. So maybe directly go and right click here. One more time, Control C, and here, and hit enter. Now default region, you can select specify none. I would highly recommend you to select a region. To find out what is your region, you can go, and in my case it was Ohio, US East. So because I'm in a global, identity and access management, it won't let me select a region because identity and access management is always a global region. So if I do see, mine is in US-East-2, or you can use US-East-1. You just remember on which region you selected, and later if you're going to do anything from command line, then or by default, if you don't specify the region, it'll go and create resources in that default region otherwise. So I'm going to select US-East-2. So I come here and say US-East-2 and hit enter. And then default output format, I'll say JSON, hit enter. And now this is configured. If you see on this output, that means it's configured now successfully. So that completes our configuration of this CLI. How to use AWS CLI. So in one of the previous lessons, we installed AWS CLI and we configured AWS CLI using AWS space configure. And we said, oh, you can configure this. But I never mentioned that how to use that. And we got a lot of requests on this and say, can you show us an example on how to use this CLI, or how do I validate my CLI is actually working or not, which is how to create or how to use AWS CLI in order to create a S3 bucket and check and verify that. So first of all, what is S3 bucket? S3 stands for Simple Storage Service. We covered in one of the previous modules where we cover this is a object storage in which you can keep your images, files, videos, or any static data or a backup, which is an object store. So this is what we're going to do is we're going to create a bucket through command line and test it. First, I'm going to show you on from a console. So you go there on S3 and you can go through S3, click on S3 here, and we'll look into, I will create this console using console a little bit later as well. So if you see here, I already have a bucket on S3 pipeline. I will select this and I can delete it. I was doing a little bit other exercise, and that's why in our DevOps foundation or DevOps, so my delete, okay. So in order to delete the bucket, the content or this bucket should be empty. So first I'm deleting the content inside this bucket, which I'm typing here permanently delete. And once I delete the objects inside this bucket, then I can go and delete this bucket itself. So if I see S3 again, and I've created and I've cleaned and deleted this bucket, or I need to type this URL, also the name of the bucket, and say delete bucket. And this is what you should be doing. There should be no bucket inside your right now. I can go and create a bucket here, but I don't want to create it here. I want to use my command line interface to create the bucket. So first of all, the command line is, I'm assuming you already have the CLI installed, and this is the Windows machine on which we installed the CLI. So right hand side, I've connected to the EC2 instance or Windows EC2 instance where I said AWS. And if I see configure, I want to verify that it's already there. So if you see list, I'm saying configuration list. I already have no profile set, but there is an access key and the secret key we did. And by default, this CLI is configured against the region US East 2. So if I don't specify anything as a region, it will automatically create my resources. If I use CLI and I don't specify anything, it will be picking up or it will be creating those resources into this US East 2 region if I don't specify the region. So here I'm saying create a bucket. So the command to create a bucket is first of all AWS and then space S3 and then ls. It will give me the list of buckets into this. So there is nothing. So now I'm saying AWS and then S3 and then space MB, and then I'm saying make bucket and S3 and the name of the bucket. So it's this way and whatever name a bucket. So I'll say Atul bucket or Atul's bucket and hit enter. So what it's going to do is it's going to make a bucket, and I'll now do the list again, AWS S3 ls, and it has created a bucket on, I'm recording this on 11th of January 2021. So it's created Atul's bucket. I should now go here and refresh this. I should see the bucket already created here now, Atul's bucket. Now I can simply go and delete this bucket again. So that means my CLI is working. This is just to show you the CLI, the bucket is working. I can simply go and remove bucket. RB is for remove bucket. So the way I did make bucket, I'm going to this time now say that remove bucket. Hit enter and it has removed the bucket, and I do the listing again, the blank. It should not show me any bucket. If I go here and refresh this now again, there's no bucket gone. So this is how we have tested that my CLI is configured properly, and I can create now resources. We've just shown you an example of bucket. You can use my creating EC2 instance or anything that you, pretty much everything that you do from console, you can do it from the command line interface as well. So this is to test the CLI is working, and we've also created a bucket using, created, listed, and deleted the bucket using command line. So in the previous part one, we looked at how to install and configure AWS CLI. And now in this lesson, we're going to look at the SDK. SDK means Software Development Kit. So how can I programmatically write or do some processing on AWS Cloud? And in this particular case, we are going to programmatically write onto a create a file and then store and write a file with a hello world or hello onto S3 bucket, which is a simple storage service account on the bucket. Now, if you are not a developer, or if you want to don't want to do this development work, you can just listen to this and skip this by doing it. But this is just to show you how it can be done programmatically. There are different ways. You can do it from command line, you can do it from programmatically, you can do it from console. So we just showed you, we are going to show you how to do it programmatically. And this is more useful if you're coming from a DevOps, but we have also just give you to understand, just for you to understand and give you a glimpse of different ways to do things on here. Now, how to do things on command line, we'll cover that later. So what we are doing here is, in this lab, is right now, either we write the program from scratch, but we don't want to do that. We are already picking up, we already have a program that we are going to download from Git repository, and I'll download it on a machine, which is Windows machine on which I installed CLI earlier on running on AWS Cloud itself. On that, I'll install Node.js. I'll also copy my code from Git repository, and I'll configure then now my using a sample script on which is a Node.js script. I'll then go and run that. When I run this program, it'll go and write the data into this S3 bucket. Now, the program name, which is which I'll cover that bit later. The program, this is how that programming code is. And if you're not a developer, you can skip this. As I said, this is just for your benefit and to knowledge, saying that you can write here. I'm saying in the program, we are saying hello underscore world.txt. And what it's doing is it's uploading the data into a bucket, or it's creating a file called hello world.txt into this bucket, and we'll see the bucket name as well, what that bucket name is. So that's what this program is doing. Now, if you want to look at into the documentation, again, same thing, but let's look at the index page again. So in order for you to do the SDK, first thing what we are doing is we are installing a Git. And why we are installing Git? Because I'm using Git tool to clone the repository or some others repository and download the files, required files on this server, on this Windows machine. Then I'm going to install a Node.js, which is required for my SDK. This is a SDK, software development kit for Node.js, because I'm using the program Node.js application. Then I'm going to install or set up a SDK. In that, I'll first download the sample project from the Git repository using the Git tool that I installed earlier here. And then I'll install SDK and its dependencies. And then I'm going to run this sample SDK program to create a file in S3 bucket. And then finally, I'm going to test this, saying that whether the file has been created or not. And this lesson is more about, next lesson is going to be all about troubleshooting. If you hit any problem, how you can troubleshoot this, any problems. So let me go directly to this here and install Git first. So sorry, this is a Git, and it's very self-explanatory. It's quite straightforward. It's Windows. So click next, next, next. So first I need to do this Git for, or download this Git from Windows. So I'll select this URL, or for downloading that Git, and I'll go to the Windows machine here, this the Windows which I created earlier. Let me close this tab, and I go to this URL or Internet Explorer, and type this URL and hit enter. So this is going to download the Git software for me. So when you say that, it's saying um, content from this website is being blocked by internet. So I'll add this URL. If you see, click on add and say, and first uncheck this box and say continue to prompt when website is blocked. Uncheck this and click on add. So I'm going to add this URL, which is a git scm as a safe add, and I'll close it. And I'll get one more time, uncheck this and say add here and close it. And now it's keep adding me. So I'll simply add one more time, close. And it's all about a configuration setting of the browser. So I think 2 or 3 times you have to disable it. And then you say 64-bit Git for, you need to select 64-bit Git for Windows setup. So I'm going to select here 64-bit Git for Windows setup, because this machine that we created on Windows machine on AWS, we created a 64-bit machine. So click on this, and here you say save. You're downloading the Git executable. Click on save. Again, remember, this Git is just to clone the repository from a central place onto this laptop, and click on run here. When it's downloaded, you click on run, and then it's all about next, next, next. You don't need to do, and click on next, and you're saying next, and leave the default options. Next, it's creating a start menu as Git. Select next and leave it to the default editor. It doesn't matter. We are not going to use this programmatically later in detail. And if you need to change, we can change it later. So we'll leave it to default. Click on next. Again, let Git decide. Again, leave it all the default options as I said, and continue from and say next, next. I'm creating and next, and next, and next, and next, and next, and then install. So once this is done, I'll be using this Git. It'll give me a Git executable or binary. So I'll use that Git to copy the data, which I'll cover then a bit later. Now, next is I need to install Node.js. Now, I need to download this Node.js again. I'll copy this URL and go to my Windows machine and open here another one, or let me go back to close this. Let's see if you'll say completing the Git wizard. So you say that finish, and I'm not interested. Let it go the release notes. I'll open now I want to download now the second part, which is Node.js. Hit enter. And this is important, guys. We need to install Node.js as well. So again, uncheck here, continue, and say add nodejs.org, close. And now I got a Node.js. There is a latest one, 15.5.1, and the recommended one is 14.5.4. Now in future, maybe when we recorded this or when the guide was done, it was 14.5.0. And when I'm looking at 15.5.4, it's totally okay. Pick up whatever you see under recommended section here, even though it doesn't match with what you have in documentation. Click on save. So we are saving this Node.js installer, and make sure that once it's downloaded, we have to install, otherwise we'll hit problems on one of the next steps. So let it download and click on run. Make sure you run, and again, we'll be selecting the default options. Keep going next and say I agree to terms and conditions, and click on next, next, and select the next. So what it's doing is it's installing, if you see nm package manager, npm. We are going to use npm later. Click on next and click on install. I'll install the npm. So what I need to do is I have any command prompt running. I need to close this command prompt. If any command prompt is running, it will close, because if you use the existing command prompt, nmp may not work. So finish, because you've just installed, and I want to refresh my command prompt again. So I'll do cmd, and here I'll just say nmp and see if it works or not. So it doesn't work, nmp. So we'll proceed further now. And now we are ready to do the SDK install. And in order to SDK install, I'm going and downloading the Git from here repository. So I'll copy this file here. Let me exit out from here and open the command prompt one more time just to be 100% sure that we are not doing anything. And I've copied this from here, and I need to go and paste it on here so that it's being, so Git, what I'm doing in this step is I'm cloning the Git from this location, which is github.com AWS sample node.js sample.git. Download this, hit enter, and it's saying cloning, and it's basically from remote, it downloaded 56 objects from remote location and copied it into, it will create a folder called AWS node.js sample.git. So let's see, we are switching to the user. So what I'm going to show you is what it does basically. So this command downloads. I'll open the internet, this Explorer, this command prompt, also not command prompt, Windows Explorer, and I'm inside. Let me make it slightly smaller. And so I need to go to this PC and go to C users administrator. So I'll go C prompt and then users. And then under administrators, what it has done is it has created a folder called AWS Node.js sample. So AWS Node.js sample, and here I have sample and I have a couple of other files as well. So I'll go to AWS CD, AWS, no, sorry, my mistake, CD dot dot, we are coming back to CD and then AWS dash Node.js dash sample, hit enter. And now on my Node.js sample, and I need to say npm install. So it was not nmp, it was npm. So I'll say npm and space and then install. Now, if you see that nmp not found, that means what it's doing is nmp is not found means you have not installed Node.js in one of the previous steps. So now you should see npm one. You can skip this, that's not a problem, deprecated. You should say that one package looking for founding, which is fine. Just leave it as long as you see added 15 packages or added some packages. So in the documentation says 15 packages, which are good. So it has now installed the SDK and its dependencies. And now I'm ready to run this sample.js program. So if I go back here, if you see here, this is a sample.js which I got earlier programmatically. And if you open this sample.js and click on edit, if you see, this is what this is doing, this sample.js, it's creating the bucket name as node-sdk-sample, and then it's creating an, inside that it's creating a file called hello-world.txt. That's what it's doing programmatically. And if you're not a developer, I know it might be difficult to understand, but or if you just read it quite simple, and I'm adding this file. So it's saying writing hello world this. So all I need to do is now run this program. I'm inside folder called C users administrator AWS Node.js-sample, and then I'll be saying node space sample.js. So I'll type uppercase node space sample.js, hit enter, and it's saying successfully uploaded data to this one, which is it's basically added into this bucket node SDK sample dash, and this is my bucket folder name and hello world.txt. So it's successfully uploaded. Now we are good and good to see. So we will be going into my S3 bucket, and so this number is UUID. If you read this documentation here, this is my unique ID. So we'll go inside my S3 bucket, and then what we are doing is we'll be looking at there is a bucket being created or not. So let me go to my account here, and we'll say S3, and this is, you click on this S3 here, S3 bucket. Now this is, I'm recording this on January the 7th, 2021, and this is creation date just few minutes ago. So you click on this bucket, And in this bucket, I see hello world.txt file. So if I can open this, so what this program has done, which program? Let me go back to this documentation again. So this program, which is my program called no sample.js. So sample.js we saw. This is my sample.js. It's saying um, create a bucket with its name node SDK sample dash UUID and which is my node UID. And then it's going to create a file inside that which is with hello world. So if I go back to the console again, and this is my file which is hello world.txt, and the content inside that is hello world.txt. This is my object inside that. So I've programmatically written this file here. So that completes how to create a file programmatically on using SDK, Software Development Kit. You have already shown I can go and create some file from console. I simply go and let me show you one more time. So earlier we saw this using programmatically. Now I can go and create a bucket and say node sample or whatever is the bucket name. And I can create in whatever region I can want to create this bucket and click on create bucket, or name already exists. So we'll say 2 and create bucket. Maybe I think there might be some bug. We'll cover that later. So this is how I can come and create a bucket from console and place our objects. We'll have a separate lab for a bucket creation or how to create buckets from console. You could do the same thing on CLI, and third way is programmatically. That's what I wanted to show you how to do it programmatically. So this is what I covered when I was doing in the previous module. I said there are different 3 ways to access the resources. Console you already are familiar with. CLI we have not yet shown. We have just installed the CLI, but we have not used the CLI. The SDK, you saw this now in this lesson about programmatically. This is what I mean by programmatically. You can use any programming language. We have used just now on Node.js, and that's why you've installed Node.js SDK. If you need Java, if you write using Java, you might be doing SDK for Java. Or for C++, you'll be installing first SDK for C++, and then you'll be using that to do programmatically some work on your AWS cloud. Now, coming back to the activity guide, if you hit any problem, make sure you first go through the troubleshooting section. We have a lot of users. If you miss, most of the time, it's you missed a particular step in the guide. So make sure you go through guide one more time thoroughly. For example, if you have not CC'd properly to AWS Node.js sample folder, once you've downloaded this software, you need to make sure you CD to AWS Node.js sample, or NMP is not installed. Make sure that you have installed Node.js, or Git is not recognized. Then make sure you have installed the Git or invalid access key ID. That means you have not the configuration you did for your AWS CLI is not done properly. If you get no such bucket, which means when you were configuring the CLI at the time, you did not configure the default region correctly, so it doesn't know programmatically, it doesn't know in which region to select. Other could have been in my program, I could have used the region as well, and like that. So there'll be look at the troubleshooting section as well. So this completes this 2-part series. Of first one we looked at CLI, and then second part, in this part we looked at SDK, or how to write work on SDK or programmatically write files to AWS.
So we have put down everything about the certification, including the basic concepts that one should know everything like introduction to AWS, security management AWS, object storage options, designing computing environment, networking and monitoring services, leverage Route 53 for hosting zones, database server and analytics, application and messaging services, configuration management and automation, architecting on AWS 1 and architecting on AWS 2. So in this training, we take you from basic to advanced level along with the tips and resources for clearing the certification exam. We also have a separate team working for CV preparation and on-job support. So if you want to become an AWS Certified Solution Architect Associate and want to learn right from basics to expert level, then we have a comprehensive step-by-step training for you that includes hands-on labs including the exam preparation, and most important part, 1 year on-job support. So if you are interested in this program, I would highly recommend you to attend the free class which covers most of the topics like why and who should learn AWS, cloud service deployment models and AWS services, demo on creating S3 bucket and making data available to the entire world, and many other topics. So if you are interested in this free class, you can visit k21academy.com/AWS SSA02. We also have a separate training for AWS Certified DevOps Engineering Professional. So we have put down everything about the certification, including the basic concepts that one should know, everything like introduction to DevOps on cloud, software development lifecycle automation, configuration management and infrastructure as code, and monitoring and logging in AWS, policy and automation in AWS, incident and event response, high availability fault tolerance and disaster recovery. So in this 12-week roadmap, we take you from basics to advanced level along with the tips and resources for clearing the certification exam. We also have a separate team working for CV preparation and on-job support. So if you want to become AWS Certified DevOps Engineer Professional and want to learn right from basics to expert level, then we have a comprehensive step-by-step training for you that includes hands-on labs, including exam preparation, and most important part, 1 year on-job support. So if you are interested in this program, then I would highly recommend you to attend the free class, which covers most of the topics like DevOps with AWS and tools, continuous integration and continuous deployment tools, AWS Elastic Beanstalk, infrastructure as code, and many other topics. So if you are interested in this free class, you can visit k21academy.com/AWS DevOps 02. You can also find the link in the description.